On the morning of September 11th, 1905, a packed elevated train on 9th Avenue rounds the curve at 53rd Street at a speed the engineer knows is too fast. The wheels leave the rails. 2 cars swing outward and plunge to the cobblestones below, crashing through the wooden awning of a dry goods store. 19 people die. 48 more are pulled from the wreckage with broken bones and crushed ribs. The newspapers scream about it for 3 days, and then the city forgets. Because New York in 1905 has so many ways to kill you that keeping track of them all would be a full-time occupation. You could be trampled by one of the 100,000 horses that pull wagons through the streets every single day. You could be struck by one of the new electric trolleys that seem to appear from nowhere almost silently, and the newspapers have already started calling them the public executioner. You could simply breathe too deeply on a hot August afternoon and inhale enough tuberculosis bacteria to seal your fate within the year. But tonight, none of that concerns you. Tonight, you are alive, you're young. You're walking south on the Bowery with a canvas bag over your shoulder and $4.30 in your pocket, and you're looking for a room. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now I want you to tell me something in the comments. Tell me where you are right now and what time it is where you are. Are you in bed already? On the couch? Riding a train home? I always like reading those because people listen to these from every corner of the world, and there is something strangely comforting about knowing that while you settle in tonight, someone in Tokyo is eating breakfast and someone in London is watching the rain. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let us ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1905, the month is October. The air carries that particular New York autumn chill, not cold enough for a heavy coat, but cold enough that you pull your collar a little higher and shove your hands into your pockets as you walk. The Bowery stretches ahead of you, lit by a mixture of gas lamps and the newer electric arc lights that throw hard, bluish-white pools onto the pavement. Above you, the elevated train tracks cut a dark iron lattice against the sky, and every few minutes a train roars overhead, shaking loose a fine rain of soot and rust that settles on your hat and shoulders like black snow. The noise is extraordinary. It rattles your teeth. It makes the windows in the buildings vibrate in their frames. And somehow the people around you do not even flinch. They have heard it 10,000 times. They will hear it 10,000 more. You are an immigrant. Perhaps you arrived through Ellis Island 3 weeks ago, or 3 months, or 3 years. The specifics hardly matter tonight. What matters is that you left behind a village somewhere in southern or eastern Europe, maybe a small town in Galicia, or a fishing village on the coast of Sicily, or a shtetl in the Pale of Settlement where your father mended shoes. You left because there was nothing to stay for. You left because a cousin or an uncle or a neighbor's brother had written a letter saying that in America, a man could earn $2 a day. $2. In the old country, that was a fortune. In New York, as you're quickly learning, it barely keeps you alive. The Bowery at night in 1905 is the great open sewer of the city's entertainment industry. Every other doorway leads to a saloon, a dance hall, a dime museum, a flophouse, or one of the new Nickelodeon theatres where, for 5 cents, you can sit in a folding chair and watch flickering images of trains arriving at stations and men falling off ladders. The barkers stand outside and shout into the crowd. Music leaks from every window, accordion, fiddle, the tinny punch of a player piano. Somewhere down the block a woman is singing in Italian, and her voice is so clear and sad that for a moment you stop walking and just listen. Then a horse-drawn wagon loaded with barrels of beer rolls past, and the driver screams at a man crossing the street and the moment is gone. You have been staying in a lodging house on Chatham Square for the past week, paying 10 cents a night for a canvas cot in a room shared with 14 other men. The place smells of feet and kerosene and the particular stale sweetness of unwashed wool. Every morning at 8, the lodging house keeper bangs on the door and tells everyone to get out, because the rooms need to be turned over for the next shift of sleepers. Yes, shifts. In 1905, New York, even sleep comes in shifts. The beds you vacate in the morning will be occupied by night shift workers who stumble in at 9 a.m. with sawdust in their hair and grease under their fingernails. They will sleep until 4 in the afternoon, and then the beds will be stripped and made ready for the evening crowd. It is, in its own grim way, a marvel of efficiency, but you are done with lodging houses. You have found a job, a real job, or at least a real enough job at pressing shirts in a garment shop on Allen Street. The pay is $7 a week, which sounds like a reasonable sum until you begin subtracting. Subtract the cost of food. Subtract the cost of a streetcar token on the mornings when it rains too hard to walk. Subtract the 50 cents a week you send home to your mother. Subtract the $1 a week you're paying to the man who lent you the money for your steamship ticket. What remains is just enough to afford a room of your own, not an apartment, not a flat, a room. One room in a tenement building, with a window that may or may not open and a door that may or may not lock. This is what you are looking for tonight. You turn east off the Bowery and into the grid of streets that make up the Lower East Side. The buildings here are 5 and 6 stories tall, pressed together so tightly that from the sidewalk you cannot see the sky between them. They are made of brick, most of them, though the brick has long since turned the colour of soot. The fire escapes cling to the facades like iron skeletons, hung with laundry even at this hour, because in these buildings there is never enough space inside for anything, including drying your clothes. The stoops are crowded with people despite the chill, men smoking, women talking, children chasing each other between the legs of adults who swat at them absently. Historians still argue whether the Lower East Side in this period was the most densely populated place on Earth, or merely one of the most densely populated. The numbers are staggering either way. By 1900, roughly 350,000 people were packed into each square mile of this neighbourhood. To put that in perspective, the densest neighbourhoods in modern Manhattan hold about 70,000. The Lower East Side in 1905 held 5 times that. 5 times. You could stand on the corner of Hester and Ludlow and be surrounded by more human beings per acre than anywhere else in the known world. And every single one of them needed a place to sleep. Word count, 1,287. You find the building on a side street between Hester and Grand. There is no sign, no advertisement. You learned about it from a man at the garment shop who told you that the landlord's agent sometimes has rooms available on the upper floors. The building is 6 stories tall, 25 feet wide, and about 100 feet deep. It was built in 1863, back when the neighbourhood was still German and Irish, before the great waves of Jewish and Italian immigration transformed it entirely. It is what the housing reformers call an old law tenement, which means it was built before. The Tenement House Act of 1901, which means it was built according to rules so lax that they barely qualified as rules at all. The front door is unlocked. It is always unlocked. There is no lobby, no vestibule, no doorman, just a narrow hallway that smells of boiled cabbage, coal dust, and something harder to identify, something that is probably the accumulated residue of 40 years of human living pressed into walls that have never been properly cleaned. The hallway is dark. There's a single gas jet at the far end, its flame turned so low it barely produces any light at all, because the landlord pays for the gas, and the landlord does not believe in spending money on anything that does not directly generate rent. You climb the stairs. The staircase is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people to pass, and the steps are worn into shallow curves by 4 decades of boots and shoes. The banister wobbles under your hand. On the 2nd floor landing, a door stands open and you can see into an apartment, where a woman is bent over a sewing machine, working by the light of a kerosene lamp. 2 children sit on the floor beside her, playing with wooden spools. The woman does not look up. She is doing piecework, sewing buttons onto shirts at a rate of approximately 3 cents per dozen, and she cannot afford to lose a single minute. The landlord's agent is a short, thick man with a moustache who meets you on the 4th floor. He does not ask your name. He does not ask where you're from. He asks only one question. Can you pay? You tell him yes. He nods and leads you down the hallway, to a door near the back of the building. The room is approximately 10 feet by 12 feet. That is 120 square feet, roughly the size of a modern walk-in closet, or about a quarter of a standard hotel room. There is a window, but it opens onto the air shaft, not the street, which means that instead of looking out at the world, you're looking at a narrow vertical slot between your building and the one next door. The air shaft is perhaps 2.5 feet wide, and when you lean out and look down, you can see garbage that has been thrown from the windows above. Potato peelings, chicken bones, old newspapers, a single decomposing shoe. The smell that rises from this shaft is the smell you noticed when you entered the building, that unidentifiable sweetness now identifiable as rot. The room contains a narrow iron bed with a straw mattress, a small wooden table, a single chair, and a hook on the back of the door for hanging your coat. There is a coal stove in the corner, though the agent tells you that the building has recently been fitted with steam heat, so you may not need to use it. The walls are covered in peeling paper that might once have been blue, but is now a greyish brown. The ceiling is stained with watermarks in shapes that, if you squint, look vaguely like maps of countries that do not exist. The floor is bare wood, worn smooth and dark by years of foot traffic. There is a nail in the wall where the previous tenant hung something, a picture perhaps, or a mirror or a crucifix. The hole it left behind is the only decoration in the room. The rent is $3 a month. This is on the low end for the neighbourhood. A proper 2-room apartment on a lower floor with a street-facing window might cost $10 or $12, but $3 is what a single room on the 4th floor overlooking the air shaft costs in a building that was old when your parents were young. You hand over the first month's rent plus a deposit of 50 cents, and the agent gives you a key that feels like it might fit any lock in the building. He leaves without saying goodbye. You sit on the bed. The straw mattress crinkles beneath you like a nest of dry leaves. The springs protest with a sound that is half groan, half musical note. You set your canvas bag on the floor and look around your room. Your room. These 2 words carry a weight that is difficult for anyone who has never shared a sleeping space with 14 strangers to fully appreciate. Your room. 4 walls, a door that closes, a lock that turns. Privacy, that most extraordinary luxury, that thing you have not had since you left the old country. You have it now, and it cost you $3.50. Through the wall, you can hear your neighbour coughing. It is a deep, wet cough, the kind that comes from the chest, and it goes on for a long time. Through the airshaft window, you can hear a baby crying 2 floors up and a couple arguing in Yiddish 3 floors down. Somewhere in the building, someone is frying onions. Somewhere else, someone is playing harmonica, badly but with feeling. The steam pipes in the wall begin to make a sound, a slow, metallic ticking that builds in tempo until it becomes a rhythmic banging, like someone tapping a wrench against a hollow pipe, which is essentially what is happening inside the wall. This is the sound of steam heat arriving, is the sound of hot water being forced through cast iron pipes and into cast iron radiators, and it is a sound that will become the soundtrack of your nights for as long as you live in this building. The radiator in your room is a hulking thing, about 3 feet tall and 2 feet wide, made of cast iron shaped into vertical columns. When the steam reaches it, it begins to hiss, a long drawn-out shhh that rises and falls like breathing. Then it begins to tick. Then it begins to clank. Then, just when you think it has settled, it lets out a single sharp bang that makes you flinch so hard you nearly fall off the bed. This is what New Yorkers will come to call water hammer, the sound of condensed water being thrown against the inside of the pipes by the force of incoming steam. It sounds like someone hitting the radiator with a sledgehammer. It sounds like a gunshot in a cathedral. It sounds like the entire building is about to come apart at the seams. And then 10 seconds later it happens again. Welcome to New York. Welcome to 1905. Welcome to your one small room. The radiator, once it finally settles, and it takes the better part of an hour, begins to throw off heat with the enthusiasm of a small furnace. The room, which was chilly when you arrived, becomes warm. Then it becomes hot. Then it becomes so hot that you have to open the airshaft window, letting in the cold October air along with the smell of rotting garbage and the sound of the arguing couple, who have now moved on from Yiddish to what sounds like a dialect of Polish. This is the essential paradox of steam heat in a New York tenement. You are either freezing or boiling, and the only thermostat is the window. The landlord controls the boiler. The landlord decides when the heat goes on and when it goes off. You have no say in the matter. You have a radiator that is either a block of cold iron or a block of hot iron, and you adjust accordingly. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of steam heat in New York tenements was primarily driven by the Tenement House Act of 1901, which mandated minimum heating standards, or by the landlord's realization that steam was actually cheaper than providing coal to individual stoves in every apartment. The answer is probably both. Either way, by 1905, most tenement buildings in the Lower East Side have been retrofitted with steam heating systems, and the sound of banging radiators has become as much a part of the New York soundscape as the elevated trains. Word count bar 370. You do not sleep well that first night. This is not because the bed is uncomfortable, although it is. It is not because the room is too hot, although it is. It is because the building is alive. A tenement building in 1905 is never quiet. At no hour of the day or night does it fall fully silent. There is always someone awake, always someone moving, always someone making noise. The walls between apartments are thin, a single layer of lath and plaster, sometimes less, and sound travels through them as easily as light through a window. You lie on your straw mattress and you listen to the building breathe. From the apartment directly below you, you hear the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of a sewing machine. The woman down there, you will learn her name eventually, but tonight she's just a sound, works until well past midnight, because the shirts need to be finished by morning and the children kept her from starting until they fell asleep. From the apartment next door, the coughing continues. It comes in waves. 5 minutes of silence, then a fit that lasts 30 seconds and sounds like it might tear the man apart. You will learn eventually that his name is Iancu, that he came from Romania 2 years ago, and that the cough is tuberculosis. You will not learn what happens to him. Some stories in the tenements do not have endings, they simply stop. From the floor above you hear footsteps, heavy, deliberate. The footsteps of a man pacing back and forth in a small room, which is all there is room to do. You hear the creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair, the clink of a bottle against a glass. From somewhere further away, deeper in the building, you hear singing. It is faint, just a thread of melody drifting through the air shaft, and it takes you a moment to recognize it as a lullaby. Someone is singing a baby to sleep, and the song is one you know, one your own mother sang to you in a language you're already beginning to forget. The building has 20 apartments, 4 on each of the 5 residential floors. Each apartment has between 2 and 4 rooms, depending on which floor it is on and how the space has been divided over the years by landlords seeking to maximize rent. In these 20 apartments live approximately 120 people, men, women, children, and boarders. Some of the apartments hold a single family. Others hold 2 families, or a family and 3 boarders, or 5 single men sharing 2 rooms, sleeping in shifts the way you did at the lodging house. The building was designed to hold perhaps 60 people comfortably, and comfortably is a generous word. At 120, it is operating at double capacity, which means the hallways are always crowded, the staircase is always in use, and the 2 toilets on each floor, installed just this year in 1905, as part of the retrofitting mandated by the Tenement House Act, are shared by approximately 24 people each. Before this year, before the indoor toilets were installed, the building's residents used outhouses in the backyard. 20 outhouses for 120 people. The lines, particularly in winter, were something that people preferred not to remember. The hallway toilets are a vast improvement, but they come with their own particular challenges. They are water closets connected to the building's new plumbing system, and they flush. This is a luxury that many of the residents have never experienced before. Some of them, frankly, are not entirely sure how the mechanism works. The toilets are shared by 4 apartments on each floor, and they are locked with a key that each apartment possesses, which means that at 3 in the morning, when you shuffle down the dark hallway in your bare feet to use the toilet, you may find the door locked and someone else inside. And you will stand in the hallway and wait, shivering, listening to the pipes gurgle, hoping they hurry. The water for the building comes from a single tap in the hallway on each floor. There is no running water inside the apartments, at least not in the older ones like yours. The newer apartments on the lower floors have had kitchen sinks installed, but the upper floors have not been reached by the plumbers yet, so you carry your water in a bucket, water for cooking, water for washing, water for drinking, from the hallway tap to your room and back again. You will do this several times a day, every day, for as long as you live here. It is one of those small repetitive tasks that eats time the way rust eats iron, slowly and completely. The gas light in your room is a single jet mounted on the wall near the door. It gives off a yellowish light that makes everything in the room look slightly jaundiced, and it produces a faint hissing sound that you will eventually stop hearing, the way you will eventually stop hearing the radiator bang and the neighbour cough and the trains roar overhead. The human capacity for adaptation is remarkable. Within a week, all of these sounds will become background noise. Within a month, you will not even notice them. Within a year, you will find that you cannot sleep without them. But that is a year from now. Tonight you notice everything. You notice the way the shadows from the gas lamp dance on the water-stained ceiling. You notice the faint draft that comes through the airshaft window, even when it's closed, because the frame does not fit properly and the putty has long since crumbled away. You notice the smell, always the smell, that particular tenement fragrance that is composed of cooking grease, coal smoke, human sweat, damp plaster, mouse droppings, and the ever-present contribution from the airshaft. It is not, strictly speaking, a bad smell. It is simply the smell of 120 people living in very close proximity in a building with insufficient ventilation. It is the smell of life, compressed. You pull the thin blanket up to your chin. The radiator hisses. The man next door coughs. The sewing machine thumps below, and you close your eyes and think about the morning, which will come sooner than you would like, because you have to be at the garment shop by 7, and the walk from here to Allen Street takes 15 minutes. And before that, you need to wash your face and fill your water bucket, and wait your turn for the toilet and buy a roll from the bakery on the corner. And all of this needs to happen before the sun is fully up, but for now, for this one moment, you are warm. You are safe. You have 4 walls and a door that locks and a roof that does not leak, at least not yet. Somewhere in the building the lullaby has stopped, which means the baby has fallen asleep. Somewhere outside a horse's hooves clop slowly down the street, growing fainter, growing softer, until they disappear into the general hum of the city, which never fully stops but which does, at this hour, settle into something lower and gentler, like a long exhalation. You sleep. Word count, Isassen 253. You wake to the sound of the building waking. It starts slowly. A door opening, footsteps in the hallway, the distant clatter of a pot being placed on a stove. Then it accelerates. More doors, more footsteps, the thud of boots on stairs, a child's voice, high and insistent, demanding something in a language you do not quite catch. The hallway outside your door fills with the sounds of morning routines compressed into a space too small to hold them. You hear water splashing, someone clearing their throat, the scrape of a match being struck. It is 6 o'clock. The building knows this not because anyone has an alarm clock. Alarm clocks are a luxury, and besides, you do not need one. But because the factories and shops open at 7, and the walk to work takes between 10 and 30 minutes, depending on where you work, and everyone needs time to eat something and use the toilet and get dressed in a room where getting dressed means standing in the 2 square feet of floor space not occupied by the bed, the table, the chair, or the stove. You swing your legs off the bed and your feet hit the cold wooden floor. The radiator, which banged and hissed its way through the night, has gone quiet. The landlord has turned off the boiler. He turns it on in the evening when people are home, and he turns it off in the morning when they leave for work, because why heat an empty building? The room is already cooling. Your breath makes a faint cloud in the air, which tells you that the temperature inside your room is somewhere in the low 50s. Outside it is colder. You dress quickly. You own 2 sets of clothes, the ones you're putting on and the ones you wore yesterday, which are hanging on the hook behind the door. You will alternate them throughout the week and wash them both on Sunday, which is your only day off from the garment shop. Washing means carrying water from the hallway, heating it on the coal stove, scrubbing the fabric against a washboard, wringing it out and hanging it on the fire escape to dry. In summer, it dries in an afternoon. In winter, it freezes solid and you bring it inside and drape it over the radiator, where it steams gently and fills the room with the smell of wet wool. Today is a work day. Today you simply dress and move on. You take your water bucket and step into the hallway. The hallway is a theatre of controlled chaos. Mrs. Abramowitz from the apartment across the hall is filling, her own bucket at the tap, and she looks at you with the expression of someone who's been awake since 5 and is already tired of the day. Her 2 daughters stand behind her, dressed for school in dark dresses with white pinafores, their hair pulled back in braids so tight they look painful. They stare at you with the frank curiosity of children who have not yet learned to pretend that strangers are invisible. You wait your turn at the tap. The water comes out cold, with a faint metallic taste that you have already stopped noticing. You fill your bucket and carry it back to your room, where you pour some into a basin on the table and wash your face and hands. The soap is a bar of yellow laundry soap that smells of lye. You dry your face with a cloth that is not quite a towel but is performing the duties of one. You run your fingers through your hair. You do not shave. You will shave on Sunday when you have time. And you put on your hat and your coat and you step out into the morning. The staircase is crowded. Everyone is leaving at once. You join the stream of bodies moving down the narrow stairs, pressed between the broad back of a man. In front of you, who smells of tobacco, and the sharp elbows of a woman behind you, who is carrying a bundle of fabric scraps to her own workshop. On the 2nd floor landing, a door is open and you catch a glimpse of a family at breakfast. Mother, father, 4 children, crammed around a table barely big enough for 2, eating bread and drinking tea from glasses, not cups, because in the Russian Jewish tradition, tea is served in a glass with a sugar cube held between the teeth. You emerge onto the street. The morning light is pale and thin, filtered through the narrow gap between the buildings on either side. The sky's a strip of grey above the roofline, interrupted by clotheslines heavy with laundry that has been hung out overnight in defiance of the cold. The sidewalk is already crowded. In every direction people are moving, walking to work, walking to school, walking to the pushcart markets that are already setting up on Hester Street. The smells hit you in layers. First, the bakery. There is a bakery on nearly every block in the Lower East Side, and at this hour they are all working at full capacity. The smell of fresh bread, pumpernickel, rye, challah, the round rolls called bulkers, drifts through the air like a benediction. You stop at the one on the corner, the one run by the old man with the flour-dusted apron and the permanent squint, and you buy a roll for a penny. You eat it as you walk, tearing off pieces and chewing slowly, letting the warm dough dissolve on your tongue. Second layer, the horses. There are horses everywhere. Horse-drawn wagons delivering coal, delivering ice, delivering beer, delivering furniture, delivering everything. The horses leave behind them a trail of manure that the street. Sweepers will not reach until mid-morning, and by then it has been ground into the cobblestones by 1,000 feet and 100 wheels. The smell is sharp, animal, pervasive. You step around the larger piles without looking down, because looking down is a waste of time when the entire street is a minefield. Third layer, the pushcarts. They are rolling into position now, wooden carts on iron wheels, each one loaded with a specific category of goods. One sells fish, herring, mostly, packed in salt, arranged in silver rows. One sells pickles from a wooden barrel, the brine sloshing as the vendor maneuvers the cart into place. One sells apples, one sells potatoes, one sells buttons, one sells shoelaces. One sells the collected works of Shakespeare in Yiddish translation for 5 cents a volume. The Lower East Side has, at this moment in history, roughly 5,000 pushcart vendors, and they sell virtually everything that a human being might need or want. From food to clothing to furniture to used eyeglasses. The noise. This is the thing that first-time visitors to the Lower East Side always mention. The noise. It is not one sound, but many, layered and overlapping, creating a wall of human activity that never quite resolves into individual components. The vendors are shouting, in Yiddish, in Italian, in broken English, advertising their wares. The horse drivers are shouting at the vendors to move their carts. The vendors are shouting back. Children are shouting because children shout. Women are leaning out of tenement windows and shouting down to the street, either placing orders with the vendors or telling their children to come inside. And above it all, every few minutes, the elevated train thunders past, drowning everything in a roar of steel on steel that lasts about 15 seconds and leaves behind a thin coating of black grit on every surface. You finish your roll, you turn onto Allen Street and head south toward the garment shop. The walk takes you 12 minutes. You have done it enough times now that you know the route by muscle memory. Left at the corner, past the synagogue, past the tenement with the red door, past the fire hydrant that the children use as a gathering point after school, right at the next corner, and there it is. A building like every other building, 5 stories of soot-stained brick, except that the top 3 floors have been converted into a garment workshop. Word count. Jan 364. The garment shop occupies the entire 4th floor of the building on Allen Street. You climb the stairs, there is no elevator, there is never an elevator, and push through a heavy wooden door into a room that's approximately 60 feet long and 25 feet wide. Inside this room, 32 people are already at work. They sit in rows at long wooden tables bent over sewing machines or pressing irons or cutting tables, and the noise they produce is a steady, industrial hum that fills the space, like water fills a glass. You're a presser. This means you stand at an ironing board for 10 to 12 hours a day, pressing finished shirts with a heavy flat iron heated on a gas ring. The iron weighs about 15 pounds and must be kept at a precise temperature. Too cool and it will not press the wrinkles out, too hot and it will scorch the fabric, and a scorched shirt comes out of your pay. You lift the iron, press it down, slide it across the fabric, lift it, press it down again. The motion is repetitive, rhythmic, almost meditative if you can forget that your arms ache and your lower back has developed a permanent knot and the sweat is running down your forehead and dripping onto the very shirts you're trying to press. The room is hot. Even in October it is hot because of the pressing irons and the gas. Rings and the 32 bodies, and the fact that the windows are kept closed to prevent dust from the street from settling on the finished garments. The ceiling is low, perhaps 8 feet, and the air near the top of the room shimmers with heat. The gas jets that light the room add their own warmth and their own smell, a faintly sweet, faintly nauseating odour that mixes with the smell of hot cloth and machine oil and sweat. You work beside a man named Moshi, who has been in America for 6 years and who speaks English with an accent so thick that even other immigrants sometimes cannot understand him. Moshe is a philosopher. Between shirts, during the few seconds when the iron is reheating on the gas ring, he offers observations about life, America, and the nature of human suffering that are either profoundly wise or completely nonsensical, depending on your mood. Today he tells you that the secret to surviving New York is to expect nothing and appreciate everything. Then he tells you that the flat iron is like life, heavy, hot, and if you hold it still too long it burns. Then the foreman walks by and they both stop talking and press shirts in silence. The foreman is a man named Kravitz. He's short, bald, perpetually red in the face, and he has the kind of voice that can cut through the noise of 32 sewing machines like a knife through butter. Kravitz does not yell because he is angry. Kravitz yells because yelling is the only way to be heard. He walks up and down the rows checking the quality of the work, and when he finds a flaw, a crooked seam, a missed button, a wrinkle in a collar, he holds the offending garment up and announces the flaw to the entire room, as though he were a town crier delivering news of a plague. The seamstresses and pressers and cutters have learned to keep their heads down and their hands moving, because the alternative is becoming the subject of Kravitz's next public announcement. The shop produces approximately 300 shirts per day. Each shirt passes through 7 pairs of hands before it is finished. The cutter who cuts the fabric, the sewing machine operator who assembles the body, the collar maker, the button sewer, the buttonhole maker, you the presser, and the inspector who checks the final product before it is packed into a box and sent to a department store uptown where it will be sold for $1.50. Of that $1.50, approximately 12 cents goes to the workers who made it. The rest goes to the fabric supplier, the factory owner, the department store, and the various middlemen who lubricate the machinery of commerce. $7 a week. That is what you earn for 60 hours of pressing shirts. The arithmetic of this wage defines your existence. Room rent, $3 a month, which works out to about 75 cents a week. Food, roughly $3 a week if you eat cheaply, which you do. Bread, herring, potatoes, cabbage, the occasional egg. Steamship ticket repayment, $1 a week. Money sent home, 50 cents a week. Incidentals, soap, candles, the penny for the morning roll, the nickel for a glass of beer on Saturday night, another 50 cents. That leaves you with approximately $1.25 per week, which you are saving. You're not sure what you're saving it for. An emergency perhaps, a better room, a coat for winter, a ticket for your brother, who is still in the old country and who writes letters asking when you will send for him. At noon, the shop stops for 30 minutes. This is lunch. You eat at your workstation because there is no lunchroom, and you eat what you brought from home, which is a piece of bread and a chunk of cheese wrapped in newspaper. Moshe eats the same thing, except his cheese is different. It is a hard yellow cheese that he buys from a pushcart vendor on Hester Street, and he insists it is the finest cheese in New York, which is a claim that no one has bothered to verify. You drink water from a tin cup that you share with 3 other workers, filled from a bucket that was filled from a tap in the hallway that may or may not be connected to a pipe, that may or may not be carrying water that is entirely clean. Historians still argue about the exact number of garment shops operating on the Lower East Side in 1905. The most commonly cited figure is around 16,000, but this includes everything from large factories employing hundreds of workers to tiny operations run out of tenement apartments where a single family produces piecework at their kitchen table. What is not in dispute is that the garment industry was the economic engine of the Lower East Side, employing more people than any other single industry and producing an astonishing volume of clothing. New York in 1905 produced more than 70% of the women's clothing sold in the United States. Most of it was made in rooms like this one, by people like you for wages like yours. The afternoon is long. The light from the windows, which was pale to begin with, begins to fade around 4 o'clock, and the gas jets, which have been burning all day, become the primary source of illumination. The room takes on a yellowish cast. The shadows deepen. The sound of the sewing machine seems louder in the dimmer light, as though the machines are compensating for the loss of vision by becoming more insistent. Your arms are heavy. Your back aches. The iron feels like it has gained 5 pounds since the morning. At 6 o'clock, Kravitz rings a bell, an actual handbell, brass with a wooden handle, and the machines stop. The silence, after 10 hours of constant noise, is almost shocking. It rings in your ears. You set your iron down on its stand, wipe your hands on your apron, hang the apron on a hook, put on your hat and coat, and join the stream of workers heading down the stairs and out into the street. Word count, 1261. The evening air hits your face like a cold cloth. After 10 hours in the overheated garment shop, the October chill feels almost luxurious. You stand on the sidewalk for a moment and breathe. Really breathe, filling your lungs with air that is not saturated with heat and fabric dust and gas fumes. The air outside is not exactly clean. It tastes of horse manure and coal smoke and the particular mineral tang of the city in autumn. But compared to the shop, it is like mountain air. Allen Street at 6 in the evening is a river of people. Workers are pouring out of the garment shops and factories and workshops that occupy the upper floors of every building on the block. They merge with the pushcart vendors who are packing up for the night, the children who have been released from school and are running wild in the streets, and the housewives who are making last-minute purchases for dinner. The sidewalk is not wide enough for all of them, so they spill into the street, weaving between the horse-drawn wagons and the occasional automobile. Yes, there are automobiles in New York in 1905, though they're still rare enough to be a curiosity, and when one putters past, trailing a cloud of exhaust, people stop and stare. You walk home. The route takes you through the heart of the pushcart market on Hester Street, which is the busiest market in the neighbourhood and possibly in the entire city. Even at this hour, with the vendors starting to pack up, the street is choked with carts and customers. The vendors are shouting their final prices of the day. Everything is cheaper at closing time because what does not sell today must be hauled home and stored overnight, and storage, in a neighbourhood where every square foot costs money, is a luxury no pushcart vendor can afford. You stop at a cart selling potatoes. A pound of potatoes costs 2 cents. You buy 3 pounds for 5 cents. The vendor gives you a penny discount because you're a regular customer, or because it is the end of the day, or because he simply likes the look of you, or because knocking a penny off the price of 3 pounds of potatoes is the closest thing to charity that a pushcart vendor can afford. You put the potatoes in your coat pocket. They are cold and heavy and they bang against your thigh as you walk. Next, you stop at the pickle vendor. The pickle vendor is a small, wiry man named Yitzchak who stands beside a barrel of pickles suspended in brine, so salty that it could probably preserve a body for 1,000 years. He reaches into the barrel with his bare hand. Hygiene is a concept that has not yet fully penetrated the pushcart trade, and pulls out a pickle that is roughly the size of a small truncheon. Full sour or half sour, he asks. Full sour, you say. He wraps it in a piece of newspaper and hands it to you. 1 cent. You bite into it as you walk. The vinegar and garlic hit your tongue like a small explosion. It is, in its own humble way, perfect. The walk home takes you past the synagogue on the corner, which is not really a synagogue but a converted storefront with a Torah scroll and some benches, and a sign in Hebrew that you can only partially read. Past the saloon, which is doing brisk business, the door swinging open and closed as men enter and leave, each swing releasing a burst of warm air and the smell of beer and sawdust. Past the barber shop, which is closed for the night, its striped pole standing at attention in the dark. Past the laundry, which is still open, its windows fogged with steam. The Chinese laundryman visible through the glass as a blurred shape moving between the pressing boards. You climb the stairs to your room. The building is in its evening mode, which is louder and more chaotic than its morning mode. Because in the morning everyone is leaving, and in the evening everyone is arriving, and arriving means cooking, and cooking means noise and smell and heat. From every apartment comes the clatter of pots and the sizzle of food in pans. The smells are extraordinary, garlic and onion and paprika and dill and chicken fat and boiling potatoes and frying fish, and the sharp, sweet smell of cabbage being transformed into something that, in the right hands, can be almost delicious. You enter your room, you light the gas jet, you take the potatoes from your pocket and set them on the table. You fill a small pot with water from your bucket and place it on the coal stove, which you light with a match. While the water heats, you sit on the bed and eat the rest of your pickle, and watch the steam begin to rise from the pot and think about nothing in particular. This is the hour. This is the quiet hour. The hour between coming home and going to sleep. The hour that belongs to you in a way that no other hour does. In the morning you belong to the building and its demands. The water bucket, the toilet line, the staircase crush. During the day, you belong to the garment shop and Kravitz and the pressing iron. But this hour, from roughly 7 to 8 in the evening, is yours. You can cook your potatoes and eat them in peace. You can sit at the table and write a letter home. You can lie on the bed and stare at the ceiling and listen to the building settle. Around you like a great ship coming to rest at anchor. The potatoes boil. You drain them and mash them with a fork and add a pinch of salt. Salt is cheap, about 2 cents for a small bag that lasts a week. And eat them from the pot because you do not own a plate. You eat slowly. You're not in a hurry. The potatoes are hot and soft and plain, and they fill your stomach with a warmth that feels, in this moment, like contentment. Through the wall, your neighbour Yanku coughs. Through the air shaft, the baby cries. Through the floor, the sewing machine starts up again. The woman on the 3rd floor, you have learned, works until midnight every night, 7 days a week, because she has 4 children and no husband, and the piecework is the only thing between her and the street. The radiator ticks and hisses and at 8:15 delivers its nightly performance. A sequence of bangs so violent that the first time you heard them, you thought someone was breaking down the door. Now on your 4th night in the building, you barely register them. You wash your pot and your fork in the basin. You hang your work clothes on the hook. You pull on the extra shirt that serves as your night clothes. You turn down the gas jet until the flame is just a blue whisper. And you lie down on the straw mattress and listen to the city make its sounds. Word count, 1,195. Saturday is different. Saturday, for the Jewish families that make up the majority of the Lower East Side's population, is Shabbat, the day of rest, the day when work is forbidden, the day when even the sewing machines fall silent. You're not Jewish, but Shabbat shapes your Saturday all the same, because when half the neighbourhood rests, the other half adjusts. The garment shop is closed on Saturday, which means you have the day off. This is not exactly a vacation. A day off in a tenement building in 1905 means a day of chores, the washing, the mending, the errands that cannot be done during the work week because you leave in the dark and return in the dark, and the hours between are claimed by the pressing iron. But first, you sleep late. Late in this context means 7 o'clock, which is 1 hour later than your usual wake-up time. The building is quieter this morning, at least on your floor, though from the street you can already hear the sound of the pushcart vendors setting up. Because not all of them are Jewish and not all of them observe Shabbat, and commerce in the Lower East Side waits for no one and nothing. You lie in bed and listen. The radiator is cold. The landlord has not turned on the boiler yet and the room is chilly. Through the airshaft window you can hear church bells from somewhere to the west. St. Patrick's Old Cathedral, perhaps, or one of the smaller churches that serve, the Irish and Italian communities that still hold pockets of territory in the neighbourhood. The bells are a distant, pleasant sound, muffled by the buildings between here and there, and for a few minutes you lie still and let them wash over you, then you get up. The chores will not do themselves. Washing clothes in a tenement apartment is a small war fought with water, soap and a corrugated washboard. You carry 4 buckets of water from the hallway tap to your room, heating 2 of them on the stove. You lay the washboard in the basin and rub each garment against its ridges until the dirt comes loose, which takes a remarkable amount of effort for a remarkable amount of time. Your 2 shirts, your trousers, your underclothes, your socks, each one must be scrubbed, rinsed, wrung out and hung to dry. The wringing is the hardest part. Wet fabric is surprisingly heavy, and twisting it to extract the water requires a grip strength that your forearms, already tired from the pressing iron, protest loudly about. You hang the clothes on the fire escape. Your fire escape is a narrow iron platform outside the airshaft window, about 4 feet long and 2 feet wide. With a ladder leading up to the floor above and down to the floor below, it is technically an emergency exit, designed to allow residents to escape the building in case of fire. In practice, it is an all-purpose outdoor space, a balcony, a storage closet, a drying rack, and in summer, a bedroom. The city has passed laws requiring that fire escapes be kept clear of obstructions, but enforcing those laws in a neighbourhood where every square inch of space is precious is, to put it mildly, a challenge. Your wet clothes join a vertical gallery of laundry stretching from the 1st floor to the 6th. Every fire escape in the building is draped with garments in various states of dampness. Shirts and trousers and dresses and sheets and stockings and underclothes hang from improvised lines and draped over railings, and clipped to the iron grating with wooden clothespins. From the street, the building looks like it is wearing its own laundry, which, in a sense, it is. With the washing done, you turn to the second great Saturday task, shopping. Not the quick transactional shopping of the weekday evening. A pound of potatoes, a pickle, done, but the proper, deliberate shopping that supplies you for the week ahead. You take your remaining money, you have about $2, which represents your week's spending budget, and you head out to the pushcart markets. The Saturday market on Hester Street is one of the great spectacles of New York. By 9 in the morning, the street is packed so tightly with pushcarts, and shoppers that movement in any direction requires patience, elbows, and a willingness to be touched by strangers. The carts line both sides of the street, wheel to wheel, leaving a narrow channel down the middle that is supposed to allow passage, but in practice serves mainly as a compression zone where shoppers from opposite sides of the street press against each other like passengers in a subway car. The vendors are artists of persuasion. They shout, they cajole, they bargain, they flatter. They hold up their wares, a chicken, a length of fabric, a pair of shoes, and proclaim them to be the finest quality at the lowest. Price available anywhere in the city, possibly anywhere in the world, and if you do not buy now, this very second someone else will snatch it up. You will regret it for the rest of your natural life. The shoppers, who have heard all of this before, respond with their own performance, shaking their heads, walking away, coming back, offering a price so low that the vendor clutches his chest and declares that he is being robbed, that his children will go hungry, that he might as well throw himself into the East River. This is haggling. It is not merely a commercial transaction. It is a social ritual, a form of entertainment, and a way of establishing the boundaries of a relationship between buyer and seller that will in many cases last for years. The best hagglers on the Lower East Side are, by general consensus, the women. The housewives who shop here every day have refined their techniques to an art form. They know every vendor, they know every price, and they know, with a precision that would impress a Wall Street trader, exactly how much each item should cost and how much the vendor is trying to overcharge them. You buy what you need for the week: a dozen eggs, 15 cents, a loaf of rye bread, 5 cents, a pound of herring, 8 cents, 3 pounds of potatoes, 5 cents, a head of cabbage, 3 cents, a small piece of cheese, 4 cents, an onion, 1 cent, a bag of salt, 2 cents, total 43 cents. This will feed you for roughly 6 days, supplemented by the penny rolls you buy on the way to work each morning. The 7th day, Saturday, you will allow yourself a small luxury: a bowl of soup at the cafe on Delancey Street, which costs 10 cents and comes with a slice of bread and as much hot water for tea as you can drink. Word count 1,165. On Saturday afternoon, with the chores done and the shopping completed, you have something that is almost unheard of in your daily life: free time. A few hours with nothing that must be done, no iron to lift, no bucket to carry, no line to wait in. This is the hour when the Lower East Side reveals its other face, not the face of grinding work and crowded rooms, but the face of a community that has learned, despite everything, to enjoy itself. You could go to the Yiddish Theatre. There are several on the Bowery and the surrounding streets, and they offer matinee performances on Saturday afternoons that draw enormous crowds. The Grand Street Theatre, which opened just this year, is the newest and the grandest, with a proper stage and electric lighting and seats that fold down, and it is here that the great stars of the Yiddish stage, Boris Tomaszewski, Jacob Adler, Bertha Kalich, perform melodramas and comedies and musical reviews that draw tears and laughter from audiences who understand every word and feel every emotion, as though it were happening to them personally. A ticket costs between 10 and 30 cents depending on where you sit, and the shows last 2 or 3 hours, and the audiences are passionate, vocal, and not at all shy about expressing their opinions during the performance. Actors on the Yiddish stage have reported being interrupted by audience members who shout advice to the characters, argue with the dialogue, and occasionally throw food. But today you do not go to the theatre, today you go to the Nickelodeon. This is one of the new storefront theatres that have begun appearing all over the Lower East Side in the past year. The word theatre is generous. It is in reality a converted store with folding chairs, a white bedsheet nailed to the back wall, and a projector that throws flickering, jerky images onto the sheet accompanied by the tinkling of an upright piano played by a man who may or may not be able to see the screen from where he sits. Admission is 5 cents, a nickel, which is how the Nickelodeon gets its name. You sit in the dark and watch. The films are short, 2 or 3 minutes each, separated by title cards that someone in the audience reads aloud for the benefit of those who cannot read English. A train arrives at a station. A man trips over a bucket and falls into a horse trough. A couple dances in what appears to be a garden. but is actually a painted backdrop. A fire engine races down a street, its horses at full gallop, the firemen clinging to the sides of the wagon. None of it is art. All of it is magic. The images move. They move. This is still, in 1905, a miracle, and the audience responds to it with gasps and laughter and, in the case of the train arriving at the station, a few screams from people in the front row who are not entirely sure that the train will stay on the screen. The Nickelodeon show lasts about 40 minutes, and when it's over, you step back out into the street blinking in the late afternoon light. The sun is low, throwing long shadows down the cross streets, turning the brick facades a warm orange that almost makes them look beautiful. Almost. The buildings are still grimy, the streets are still dirty, the smell of horse manure and coal smoke still hangs in the air. But in this light, at this hour, the Lower East Side looks like a painting. A slightly dingy, slightly crooked painting, but a painting nonetheless. You walk. Walking is the primary form of recreation on the Lower East Side because it is free and because the streets, for all their noise and filth, are endlessly interesting. Every block is different. Every doorway leads to a different world. On one block, you pass a row of tenements occupied almost exclusively by Romanian Jews, and the air smells of mamaliga. Cornmeal porridge, and the language drifting from the windows is a mixture of Romanian and Yiddish that sounds like two radio stations broadcasting simultaneously. On the next block, the tenements are Italian, and the air smells of garlic and tomato sauce, and the language is Neapolitan dialect. And the women sit on the stoops with their knitting and watch you pass with expressions of friendly suspicion. This is one of the remarkable things about the Lower East Side in 1905, the way that dozens of nationalities and ethnic groups live packed together in an area of roughly 1 square mile, each maintaining its own language, its own food, its own customs, its own internal social structure, while simultaneously participating in a shared street life that blends them all together into something new and unprecedented. The pushcart market is a perfect example. A Jewish pickle vendor sets up next to an Italian fruit seller, who sets up next to a Greek olive merchant, who sets up next to a Chinese vegetable grower from a farm on Long Island. Their customers wander from cart to cart, crossing ethnic and linguistic boundaries with every purchase. Historians still argue about whether this mixing was harmonious or merely proximate, whether the different groups actually got along or simply occupied the same space while maintaining rigid internal divisions. The answer, as with most things involving human beings, is both. There were tensions, there were prejudices, there were neighbourhoods within neighbourhoods, blocks where one group was welcome and another was not. But there was also, at the pushcart level, at the stoop level, at the fire escape level, a kind of daily negotiation that produced over time something that looked a lot like coexistence. You walk until the sun goes down and the gas lamps flicker to life and the air takes on the particular blue-grey quality of a New York evening in October. Then you turn toward home. The streets are quieter now. The pushcarts have been wheeled away. The vendors have gone home. The children have been called inside. A few saloons are doing business, their windows glowing yellow, their doorways breathing out warmth and the sound of voices. A horse stands at the curb, hitched to an empty wagon, its head hanging low, its eyes half closed. It has been working all day and it is tired, and you feel a sudden unreasonable kinship with it. You climb the stairs. You enter your room. You light the gas jet and sit on the bed and realise that you are, despite the chores and the shopping and the Nickelodeon and the walk, not tired enough to sleep. This is unusual. Most nights you fall asleep within minutes of lying down, because the work exhausts you completely. But today was different. Today you rested, and rest, paradoxically, has left you restless. Word count 1021. So you do what many tenement dwellers do when sleep will not come on a Saturday night. You go visiting. Visiting in the tenement world does not require an invitation. It barely requires a reason. You simply walk down the hall or up the stairs and knock on someone's door, and if they're home and not asleep, and in a tenement building, at least one of those conditions is almost always met. They let you in. You knock on the door of the apartment on the second floor, the one where the family with 4 children lives, because you have heard that the father, whose name is Avram, plays chess and you play chess. And a game of chess is as good a reason to visit as any. Avram opens the door in his shirt sleeves, his suspenders hanging down, his reading glasses perched on his forehead. Behind him, the apartment is warm and bright. The gas jet is turned up high, and the stove is throwing off heat. And the 4 children are arranged around the room in various attitudes of enforced quiet. The 2 older ones are reading. The youngest is asleep on a pallet on the floor. The other one is stacking wooden blocks into a tower and then knocking it down and then stacking it again, which is the kind of activity that can keep a child occupied for hours and which produces a rhythmic crash and build sound that serves as background music for the evening. Avram's wife, whose name is Rivka, offers you tea. You accept, because refusing tea in a Jewish household is not really an option. The tea is served in a glass, as is the custom, and it is strong and sweet and so hot that you have to hold the glass through a folded cloth. Rivka apologizes for the mess, which is a formality. Because the apartment is not messy, it is simply full of furniture, full of children, full of the accumulated objects of a family life being conducted in 2 rooms. There is a bed, the parents' bed, it's pushed against one wall. There is a table with 4 chairs. There is a sewing machine, Rivka's sewing machine, the source of the thumping that you hear through your floor every night. There is a wardrobe. There is a shelf of books, prayer books, a Hebrew Bible, a Yiddish newspaper from last week. And there is, in every remaining space, the evidence of 4 children, shoes, stockings, school books, a doll with one arm, a spinning top, a rubber ball. Avram sets up the chessboard on the table. It is a cheap board, cardboard with printed squares, and the pieces are mismatched, clearly assembled from multiple sets. One of the bishops is a thimble. One of the pawns is a button. But the chess is real, and Avram plays with a quiet intensity that suggests he takes the game seriously. Even if the equipment does not, you play. The building settles around you. From the apartment next door, the apartment directly below yours, comes the sound of a phonograph. This is unusual. Phonographs are not common in the tenements. They are expensive, costing $5 or more for a basic model, but someone in that apartment has one. And tonight they are playing a recording of a cantor singing, the voice thin and scratchy through the horn but recognizable, haunting. The melody rising and falling in the minor key that seems to be the native key of the Lower East Side. The chess game progresses slowly. You're not a strong player, and Avram is, which means that each of your moves is followed by a long pause while he considers the possibilities, and then makes a move that you did not see coming, and that usually results in the loss of one of your pieces. He is gracious about it. He points out your mistakes after the fact, showing you what you should have done, and you nod and pretend to understand and make a mental note that you will forget by the time you play again. Rivka sews while you play. The sewing machine has been quiet tonight. It is, after all, almost Shabbat's end, but now she picks up a piece of handwork, needle and thread, making small repairs to one of the children's shirts. She works by the light of the gas jet, squinting slightly, and you realize that she is probably no more than 30 years old, though she looks older. Everyone in the tenements looks older than they are. The work does it. The worry does it. The 6 flights of stairs and the water buckets and the endless cooking and cleaning and sewing do it. Life in a tenement building adds years to your face and subtracts them from the other end. The game ends. Avram wins, as you both knew he would. And you drink another glass of tea and talk for a while about nothing important. Avram tells you that his brother-in-law is looking for a presser at a shop on Rivington Street that pays $8 a week. You file this information away for future consideration. $1 more per week is not insignificant. $1 more per week is $52 a year, which is enough to rent a better room, or buy a winter coat, or bring your brother over from the old country 6 months sooner. You say goodnight and climb back up to your room. The building is quieter now. Most of the children are asleep. Most of the adults are either asleep or working quietly. The sound of the sewing machine from the 3rd floor has started up again, a soft, rhythmic presence that you have come to find almost soothing. The radiator, which has been silent for the past hour, suddenly lets out a long, low hiss, as though it has been holding its breath and has finally decided to exhale. This means the landlord has turned on the boiler for the night. You undress and lie down. The straw mattress is familiar now. You know its lumps, its hollows, the particular way it creaks when you roll onto your side. The blanket is thin, but the radiator is warming the room. And you pull the blanket up and close your eyes and listen to the sounds that are, night by night, becoming the sounds of home. The cantor's voice from the phonograph has stopped. The chess game is over. Somewhere in the building a door closes softly. Somewhere outside a horse whinnies. Somewhere far away, so far away that it sounds like a memory rather than a sound. A steamship horn blows in the harbour, low and long and mournful. The sound of someone arriving or someone leaving. The sound of the city breathing in its sleep. Word count, 1081. Sunday, your one true day off. The garment shop is closed. Even Kravitz, who seems to believe that idleness is a form of moral decay, observes Sunday. And you have no obligations, no chores, no errands that cannot wait. You wake when you wake, which turns out to be around 8 o'clock, and you lie in bed for a few minutes with the particular luxury of knowing that there is nowhere you need to be. The building on Sunday morning has a different quality. It is not silent. A tenement building is never silent, but it is gentler. The usual urgency is gone. Doors open and close more slowly. Footsteps in the hallway are softer. Even the children seem quieter, though this may be because their parents have threatened them with consequences if they disturb the neighbours before 9. You get up, wash, dress, and make your way to the street. Sunday morning on the Lower East Side is the one time when the neighbourhood comes closest to being pleasant. The pushcart vendors have not yet appeared in force. The factories are closed. The elevated train, which runs a reduced schedule on Sundays, passes overhead at longer intervals, giving the street brief periods of relative quiet between rumbles. The air is cleaner, or at least less dirty, because the factories are not producing smoke and the wagon traffic is lighter. You walk to the cafe on Delancey Street for your Saturday treat, or rather your Sunday treat, since you have decided to move it to today. The cafe is a small, narrow room with 6 tables and a counter, and a samovar that is always steaming. It is run by a man named Feldman, who came from Odessa 20 years ago, and who treats his cafe as a combination restaurant, social club, and debating society. The regulars, mostly older men, mostly immigrants, mostly opinionated, sit for hours over glasses of tea, arguing about politics, religion, union organising, and whether the new subway is a blessing or a curse. Feldman encourages the debates because arguing men drink tea and tea costs money. You order the soup. It is cabbage soup, shchi, thick and hot and flavoured with dill, and it comes with a slice of rye bread that is dark and dense and slightly sour. You eat slowly, savouring each spoonful, because this is your one extravagance for the week, and also because the soup is genuinely good, made from a recipe that Feldman claims has been in his family for 4 generations, which may or may not be true, but which makes the soup taste better regardless. While you eat, you listen to the conversation at the next table. 2 men are arguing about the subway. The subway, the IRT, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, opened just last year in October of 1904, and it has already transformed the city in ways that no one fully anticipated. For 5 cents, the same nickel that gets you into the Nickelodeon, you can travel from City Hall to Harlem in 26 minutes, a journey that by horse-drawn streetcar would take over an hour. The trains are fast, clean, and electrically lit, and they run underground, which means they are immune to weather, traffic, and the general chaos of the city's surface streets. One of the men at the next table, a short man with a thick beard and wire-rimmed glasses, is arguing that the subway is the greatest thing that has ever happened to New York. It will allow working people to live outside the slums, he says. They can live in Harlem or the Bronx or Brooklyn, where the air is cleaner and the rooms are larger, and take the subway to work every day. The tenements will empty, the overcrowding will end. The subway will save the Lower East Side by making it unnecessary to live there. The other man, taller, thinner, with the weary expression of someone who's heard too many promises, disagrees. The subway will change nothing, he says. The poor will still be poor. The rooms will still be small. The landlords will still charge as much as they can. The subway is for the people who can afford to move, not for the people who cannot. And besides, he adds, have you ridden the thing? It is already crowded. By October of this year, they are running 600,000 people through it every day. Where are all these people supposed to go when they get to Harlem? Historians still argue about who was right. In the short term, the subway did begin to ease the Lower East Side's overcrowding, as families who could afford the fare began moving to neighbourhoods further north or across the river. In the long term, however, the subway also brought new waves of residents to the Lower East Side, attracted by the same things that had always attracted people. The jobs, the community, the familiarity. The neighbourhood would remain one of the most densely populated in the country for decades. You finish your soup, drink 3 glasses of hot tea, and leave Feldman's cafe feeling warm and full and slightly caffeinated. The morning has brightened. The sun, which has been hidden behind clouds all week, makes a brief appearance, throwing pale shafts of light down between the buildings and illuminating the dust motes that dance in the air like tiny acrobats. You decide to do something extravagant. You decide to ride the subway. The nearest station is at Spring Street, about a 15-minute walk from your building. You have ridden the subway once before, on your second week in New York, but that was a rush trip to the Bronx to deliver a package for the garment shop, and you did not have time to appreciate the experience. Today, you have nothing but time. You descend the stairs into the station. The tile walls are white and clean. They were installed only a year ago and they still gleam. And the air is warm, heated by the trains and the bodies and the electric lights that line the platform. You drop your nickel into the slot of the turnstile and push through. The platform is not crowded. It is Sunday after all, and you stand at the edge and look down at the tracks, which are electrified and which carry a faint hum that you can feel through the soles of your shoes. A rat scurries along the track bed, disappears under the platform, and is gone. You are not alarmed. You have lived in a tenement building. You have seen rats. The train arrives with a rush of warm air and a screech of brakes. The doors open. You step inside. The car is clean and bright with wooden seats along the walls and leather straps hanging from the ceiling for standing passengers. You take a seat by the window, though window is generous, since you are underground and there is nothing to see but the tunnel wall, and the train lurches forward. This sensation is remarkable. You're moving through the earth at 40 miles per hour, faster than anything you have ever experienced outside of the steamship that brought you to America. The tunnel walls flash past in a blur of white tile and darkness. The stations come and go, Bleecker Street, Astor Place, 14th Street. Each one a bright tiled cave full of people waiting. The train stops. People get on, people get off. The doors close. The train moves again. You ride to the end of the line and back. It takes about an hour. When you emerge from the station onto the Lower East Side, the afternoon sun is warm on your face, and you feel the particular satisfaction of having spent a nickel on something completely unnecessary and thoroughly enjoyable. Word count 1305. The weeks pass. October becomes November. The days grow shorter and the cold grows sharper, and the radiator in your room becomes by degrees the most important object in your life. The landlord who controls the boiler in the basement has a philosophy about heat that can be summarized in 3 words: as little as possible. He turns the boiler on at 6 in the evening and off at 6 in the morning, and during the 12 hours in between, the building's steam heating system produces enough heat to keep the apartments from freezing, but not enough to keep them truly warm. The system works like this. A coal-fired boiler in the basement heats water until it turns to steam. The steam rises through a network of cast-iron pipes that run vertically through the walls, branching off at each floor to feed the cast-iron radiators in each apartment. When the steam reaches the radiator, it releases its heat and condenses back into water, which flows back down to the boiler to be reheated. It is an elegant system in theory. In practice, it is a symphony of dysfunction. The pipes are old. They were installed as a retrofit, which means they were threaded through walls and floors that were never designed to accommodate them. Some sections are properly insulated, others are not. Some connections are tight, others leak. The result is a system that delivers steam unevenly. The apartments closest to the boiler, on the lower floors, get the most heat, while the apartments furthest away on the upper floors get the least. Your room on the 4th floor falls somewhere in the middle, which means that on most nights you are tolerably warm, though tolerably is doing a lot of work in that sentence. The sounds the system makes are by now familiar to you. There is the initial ticking, which sounds like a clock made of metal. There is the hissing, which sounds like a snake the size of a drainpipe. There is the banging, the water hammer, which sounds like someone beating on the pipes with a ball-peen hammer, which is, in a sense, exactly what is happening. And there is a 4th sound, less dramatic but more persistent, that you have come to think of as the breathing, a low rhythmic whoosh-whoosh that pulses through the walls all night, as though the building itself has lungs. You have learned the radiator's moods. In the evening, when the boiler first fires up, the radiator is eager. It ticks rapidly, hisses loudly, and bangs with enthusiasm, as though it has been waiting all day for this moment and cannot contain its excitement. By 9 o'clock, it has settled into a steady purr, throwing off heat evenly. The iron columns warm to the touch. By midnight, it has reached its peak temperature, hot enough that you cannot rest your hand on it for more than a few seconds, and the room is warm enough that you have kicked the blanket off and opened the airshaft window to let in some cool air. By 3 in the morning, the steam is losing pressure, and the radiator begins to cool, and you pull the blanket back up and close the window. By 5, it is cold iron, and the room is cold, and you burrow deeper under the blanket and wish the morning were further away. Quirky tidbit. The cast iron radiators installed in New York tenements in this era were manufactured by a handful of companies, the American Radiator Company being the largest, and they were designed to be virtually indestructible. Many of them are still in service today, more than 100 years later, heating apartments in buildings that have outlasted the people who built them, the people who lived in them, and the people who complained about them. If you live in a pre-war apartment in New York today, there is a reasonable chance that you are being heated by the same technology, and possibly the same radiator, that heated you in 1905. November also brings new sounds to the building. The air shaft window, which you kept open for ventilation in October, is now closed most of the time, which means the sounds from outside are muffled but not eliminated. Through the glass you can hear the wind whistling down the narrow shaft, a high, thin sound that rises and falls with the gusts. You can hear the flap of laundry. Someone has left clothes on the fire escape, either by choice or by forgetfulness, beating against the iron railing like a flag in a gale. You can hear, on especially windy nights, the building itself creaking, the old wooden joists and floorboards shifting in their frames, the entire structure swaying almost imperceptibly in the wind. Inside the building, November brings a new rhythm. The children, confined indoors by the cold, are louder and more energetic, running up and down the hallways and pounding, up and down the stairs until the adults shout at them to stop. The adults, for their part, are more short-tempered, squeezed into their small rooms by the weather, forced into a proximity that was barely tolerable in summer and is now, in the grey days of November, beginning to grate. You hear more arguments through the walls. You hear more crying. You hear more of the particular kind of tense silence that descends on a room when people have run out of things to say but are not yet ready to forgive. But you also hear more music. When people are stuck indoors, they make music. On your floor alone, there is a man who plays the violin, not well but passionately, and a woman who sings Neapolitan folk songs in a soprano that carries through 3 walls and 2 doors and arrives in your room slightly muffled but still beautiful. There is a teenager on the 5th floor who is teaching himself the accordion, and his practice sessions, which consist of the same 3 notes played in various orders for hours at a time, have become a running joke in the building. Someone, you're not sure who, has written him a note, slipped under his door that reads, "Please learn a 4th note. Word count, 1021. December arrives, and with it, the particular challenges of winter in a tenement building. The cold is not the worst of it. The worst of it is the damp. The combination of steam heat inside and freezing air outside creates condensation on every surface. The windows, the walls, the ceiling. Water beads on the inside of your airshaft window and trickles down the sill, pooling on the floor beneath. The wallpaper, already peeling, absorbs the moisture and sags further from the wall. In the corners of the room, where the air does not circulate, dark patches of mould appear, fuzzy and faintly greenish, and no amount of scrubbing with soap and water seems to discourage them for long. The building's coal stove, the one in your room, the backup for the days when the steam heat is insufficient, becomes a necessity in December. You buy coal from a vendor on the street who sells it by the pail for 5 cents. A pail lasts about 2 days if you are conservative, which you are, because 5 cents for 2 days of coal is 12 or 13 cents a week, which is money you would rather not spend. You learn to build a fire that burns slowly, a small base of kindling, a careful arrangement of coal, the damper adjusted just so, and you learn to time it so that the stove is hottest in the early morning, before the steam heat comes on, and again in the late evening after it goes off. The cold also transforms the street. Horse manure, which in warmer weather is merely unpleasant, freezes in December and becomes a permanent feature of the cobblestones, dark, icy lumps that remain until the spring thaw, creating an obstacle course for pedestrians. The pushcart vendors, who are out in all weather, wrap themselves in layers of scarves and coats until they resemble small mobile haystacks. Their wares change with the season. Hot sweet potatoes, roasted chestnuts, cups of hot tea and coffee sold from urns heated by kerosene burners. The smell of roasting chestnuts is, in December, the defining smell of the Lower East Side. Smoky and sweet and warm, and it drifts through the streets like a promise that things will eventually be all right. The garment shop, paradoxically, is busier in winter. The demand for clothing increases, and Kravitz pushes the workers harder, extending the workday by an hour or sometimes 2. You're now pressing shirts for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and your arms have developed a permanent ache that starts at the wrists and radiates up to the shoulders. Moshe, your philosopher companion at the pressing board, observes that pain is the body's way of reminding you that you are alive. You tell him that you would prefer a less painful reminder. He laughs. It is a good laugh, warm and genuine, and it cuts through the drone of the sewing machines like a window opening. The extra hours bring extra pay, about 50 cents a week more, and you add it to your savings, which have now reached a total of $11. You keep the money in a small cloth bag hidden inside the straw mattress, because there is no bank on the Lower East Side that you trust, and the stories of people who have been robbed of their savings are too common and too recent to ignore. Yanku, your neighbour, was robbed 3 months ago. Someone broke into his room while he was at work and took everything he had, which was not much but was everything to him. Since then, you keep your money on your person during the day and in the mattress at night, and you sleep with one ear open for sounds that do not belong. December also brings something unexpected: beauty. The first snowfall of the year arrives on a Tuesday evening, sometime in the second week of December, and you're walking home from the garment shop when you notice that the air is full of white flakes drifting down slowly, almost lazily, through the glow of the gas lamps. The snow settles on the cobblestones, on the pushcarts, on the hats and shoulders of the people around you, and for a few minutes, before it is trampled and muddied and mixed with horse manure and coal dust, the Lower East Side is transformed. The ugliness is hidden. The dirt is covered. The buildings, with their sooty facades and rusting fire escapes, are softened by a layer of white that makes them look almost elegant. The children, who have been waiting for this moment with an impatience that only children can muster, pour out of the tenements and into the street, catching snowflakes on their tongues and throwing snowballs at each other and at passing adults, who duck and grumble and secretly enjoy it. You stand on the corner of Hester and Ludlow and watch the snowfall. The elevated train rumbles overhead, shaking loose a cascade of snowflakes from the iron girders. The gas lamps flicker. The pushcart vendors, those who have not yet left, are covering their wares with canvas tarps and hurrying to pack up. A woman leans out of a tenement window 3 stories up and calls down to the street in Yiddish, telling someone, a child presumably, to come inside before they catch pneumonia. The child ignores her. Children in the Lower East Side have been ignoring their mother's warnings about pneumonia since the neighbourhood began, and they will continue to ignore them for generations. You walk home through the snow. Your shoes are thin and the snow seeps through almost immediately, chilling your feet, but you do not hurry. There is something about snow in a city, any city, but especially this city, that makes you want to slow down. The noise is softer. The edges are blurred. The usual harshness of the streets is gentled by the white cover, and for a moment, just a moment, you can almost forget that you're poor and tired and far from home. You climb the stairs to your room. You brush the snow from your hat and coat. You light the gas jet and the coal stove and sit on the bed and watch the snow through the airshaft window, falling past the rectangle of sky that is the only sky your room possesses. It is a small rectangle, perhaps 2 feet by 3, framed by soot-stained brick on all sides, but tonight, with the snow drifting through it, it looks like a painting. A small painting, a miniature, but yours. The radiator begins to tick, the building begins to settle, and you sit and watch the snow and feel, for no reason that you can explain, something very close to peace. Word count 1088. January 1906. The new year arrives without fanfare in the tenements, because fanfare costs money, and money is in short supply. Some of the families mark the occasion with a small gathering, a glass of schnapps, a plate of honey cake, a toast to better times, but most simply go to bed at the usual hour and wake up in the morning to find that the new year feels exactly like the old one, except colder. January is the coldest month. The temperature drops below 0 on several occasions, and the building, which was not designed to withstand this kind of cold, reveals its weaknesses. The wind finds every crack, every gap, every place where the mortar has crumbled or the window frame has warped. Your airshaft window, which has never fit properly, now admits a constant draft that no amount of stuffed rags can entirely block. You nail a piece of canvas over the window frame, which reduces the draft to a whisper, but also eliminates the small amount of light and air that the window provided, plunging your room into a permanent twilight. The water in the hallway tap freezes one morning. This is a crisis. Without water, there is no cooking, no washing, no drinking. The tenants gather in the hallway and argue about what to do. Someone suggests heating the pipe with a candle. Someone else points out that heating a frozen pipe with a candle is how buildings burn down. A third person suggests going to the next building, which may have unfrozen pipes, and asking to borrow water. This is what they end up doing, and the neighbour building obliges because in the tenements, the rule of mutual aid is not enforced by law, but by the simple understanding that tomorrow, the crisis might be yours. The frozen pipe thaws by noon. The sun, weak as it is, warms the exterior wall just enough, but the incident serves as a reminder of how fragile the infrastructure of tenement life is. Everything works, but just barely. The plumbing works, but the pipes are old and narrow and prone to freezing. The gas works, but the pressure fluctuates, and some evenings the flame in your room gutters and dims to almost nothing. The steam heat works, but the boiler is temperamental, and there are mornings when the landlord is late firing it up and the building is cold until noon. Each system operates at the edge of failure, and when one fails, the others are affected, and the whole precarious structure wobbles. The cold also brings illness. Tuberculosis, which is always present in the tenements, surges in winter. When people are crowded indoors and the air does not circulate, your neighbour Yanku's cough, which has been a constant companion since you moved in, grows worse in January. The fits last longer. They come more often. Some nights you lie in bed and listen to him cough for what seems like hours, a wet, ragged sound that makes your own chest ache in sympathy. You do not know what to do for him. There is nothing to do for him. Tuberculosis in 1905 is a death sentence for the poor. The rich go to sanitariums in the mountains, where they breathe clean air and drink milk and rest until the disease either kills them or retreats. The poor stay in their rooms and cough and hope and die. One day in mid-January you come home from work and Yanku's door is open. You look inside, the room is empty, the bed has been stripped. His few possessions, a coat, a hat, a pair of shoes, a photograph of a woman, are gone. You ask Mrs. Abramowitz what happened. She tells you that Yanku was taken to the hospital this morning. She does not know which hospital. She does not know if he will come back. Her tone suggests that she does not expect him to. The room stays empty for 3 days, and then a new tenant moves in, a young man from Lithuania named Petrus, who works at a tannery on the East River and who smells permanently and inescapably of leather and chemicals. You introduce yourself. He shakes your hand and smiles and says something in Lithuanian that you do not understand. You nod and smile back. In the tenements, language barriers are navigated primarily through smiling and nodding. January is also the month when you make a decision that will change your daily life, in a small but significant way. You join the Mutual Aid Society. The Mutual Aid Society is an organisation. There are dozens of them on the Lower East Side, organised along ethnic, religious and occupational lines that pools the contributions of its members to provide benefits in times of need. For 25 cents a month, you get sick pay if you're unable to work, a death benefit that will cover the cost of a funeral if you die, and access to a small lending fund if you need to borrow money for an emergency. The meetings are held on Wednesday evenings in the back room of a saloon on Eldridge Street. There are about 40 members, all of them working men, most of them from the same region of the old country. The meetings are conducted in a mixture of the home language and English, and they follow a rigid parliamentary procedure that seems absurdly formal given the informality of the setting. A smoky back room with a sawdust floor and a bartender who doubles as the sergeant-at-arms. The president of the society, a barrel-chested man named Dmitri who works at a slaughterhouse, calls the meetings to order by banging a wooden gavel on the bar and addresses each member as brother. The meetings last about an hour. There are reports, who is sick, who is behind on dues, how much money is in the treasury. There are discussions, should the society raise the death benefit? Should it start a lending library? Should it organise a social event, a dance, a picnic for the members and their families? The discussions are earnest, sometimes heated, and always concluded with a vote, conducted by show of hands. After the meeting, the men stay for a beer, 5 cents a glass, and the conversation turns to the topics that always surface when working men gather after a long day. Work, money, the old country, and the question of whether America is really better or just differently difficult. Word count, 1/40, February. The cold persists, but something else has changed, something you notice gradually. The way you notice a season turning, not all at once but in small increments, each one barely perceptible but collectively unmistakable. You are settling in. The room that felt small and strange in October now feels small and familiar. The sounds that kept you awake, the radiator, the coughing, the sewing machine, are now the sounds that put you to sleep. The route to work that you once had to think about is now automatic. Your feet carrying you to Allen Street without conscious direction, the way a horse knows the way to its stable. You have developed routines. Monday through Saturday you wake at 6, wash, dress, buy a roll, walk to work, press shirts for 10 to 12 hours, walk home, cook potatoes or cabbage or whatever you bought on Saturday, eat, write a letter if you have anything to say, read if you have anything to read, usually a Yiddish newspaper that someone at the garment shop has left behind, and go to bed. Sunday, you sleep late, do your washing, go to Feldman's Cafe and walk the neighbourhood. Wednesday evening, you attend the Mutual Aid Society meeting. Saturday evening, you play chess with Avram. This is your life. It is small and repetitive and exhausting, and it is, in its own way, enough. The letters from home arrive irregularly, sometimes 2 in a week, sometimes none for a month. They are written on thin paper, in a cramped hand, in the language of the old country, and they contain the kind of news that never changes. The harvest was poor, the winter was hard, your brother is well but impatient. Your mother misses you, the neighbour's cow had twins. Reading them is both a comfort and a torment. The distance between you and your family is not measured in miles, but in everything that miles represent. The people you cannot see, the meals you cannot share, the births and deaths and weddings and arguments and reconciliations that happen without you. You write back. Your letters are careful, deliberate, composed on Sunday afternoons at the table in your room, with a pen borrowed from Avram and ink that you bought at the pushcart market for 3 cents. You tell them you are well. You tell them the work is hard but fair. You tell them the room is small but warm. You do not tell them about the smell or the noise or the frozen pipes or Yanku or the pressing iron that weighs 15 pounds and feels like 50 by the end of the day. You do not tell them that some nights you lie awake and stare at the water stains on the ceiling and wonder if you made a mistake. You send 50 cents with each letter, folded inside the paper, and you hope it arrives safely, because the postal system between New York and the old country is reliable, but not infallible. And 50 cents lost in transit is 50 cents you will never get back. February also brings you closer to the people in the building, not by choice, but by proximity. In a tenement, privacy is an aspiration, not a reality. You know your neighbours' lives in a way that would be considered intrusive in any other context, but is simply unavoidable here. You know that the couple on the 5th floor fights every Tuesday night, because Tuesday is the night the husband comes home from the saloon where he spends his pay, and the wife is waiting for him with an inventory of all the things they cannot afford because of the money he has spent on beer. You know that the woman on the 3rd floor, the one with the sewing machine, has a suitor, a tailor from Rivington Street, who visits on Sunday afternoons and brings flowers, which she places in a jar on the windowsill and which, against all odds, survive for days in the dim light of the air shaft. You know that the baby on the 5th floor has colic, which means it cries for hours every evening, a thin, high-pitched wail that penetrates walls and floors and ceilings and eardrums with equal ease. You know that the old man on the 1st floor, you have never learned his name, only that he is old and that he is always sitting on the stoop. Regardless of the weather, he is deaf in one ear and shouts everything he says at twice the necessary volume. You know that Mrs. Abramovitz across the hall makes the best chicken soup in the building, because you can smell it every Friday evening, and the smell is so good that it constitutes a form of torture for anyone who is not invited to share it. These people are not your friends exactly. They are your neighbours, which in a tenement is something more complex and more binding than friendship. You depend on them in ways that friends do not depend on each other. You share a hallway, a staircase, a water tap, a toilet. You breathe the same air, filtered through the same inadequate ventilation. You hear their lives through the walls and they hear yours. You're connected, whether you like it or not, by the architecture of your shared poverty. This is the paradox of tenement life. You live in one room, but you never live alone. Your solitude is an illusion maintained by a thin layer of lath and plaster. Beyond that layer, the building is a community, chaotic, noisy, sometimes infuriating, but alive in a way that a solitary house in the countryside could never be. You fall asleep to the sound of other people's lives, and you wake to the sound of other people's mornings, and in between, the building breathes and creaks and groans and settles around you like a living thing. February ends, March begins. The cold loosens its grip by degrees. The ice in the gutters begins to thaw, creating small rivers that run down the centre of the streets and carry with them the accumulated grime of the winter, coal dust, horse manure, scraps of paper, fragments of broken bottles. The pushcart vendors, who have been huddling over their kerosene burners all winter, begin to straighten up and look around like bears emerging from hibernation. The children, released from the confinement of the cold months, pour back onto the streets with an energy that borders on violence. They play stickball in the alleys and hopscotch on the sidewalks and tag in the streets, dodging horses and wagons and the occasional automobile with a reckless confidence that terrifies their mothers and impresses their fathers. Spring is coming. You can feel it in the air. A softness, a warmth, a smell of earth beneath the coal smoke. The building feels different too. The radiator, which has been your constant companion all winter, begins to seem less essential. The mornings are lighter. The evenings are longer, and you begin to think for the first time in months about the future. Word count 152. March in the Lower East Side brings a particular phenomenon that first-time visitors find alarming and long-time residents find merely annoying: the spring thaw. All winter, the cold has been a preservative, freezing garbage and waste in place. Ceiling smells under ice, turning horse manure into hard, harmless lumps. Now, as the temperature rises, the ice melts, and everything it has been hiding comes back to life. The streets begin to smell. Not the ordinary, everyday smell of the neighbourhood, cooking, grease and coal smoke and human proximity, but a deeper, more primal smell. The smell of organic matter decomposing after months of suspended animation. The air shaft in your building is the worst. All winter, residents have been throwing things into the shaft. It is easier than carrying garbage down 4 or 5 flights of stairs, and the cold has kept the refuse frozen and relatively inoffensive. Now it thaws. The smell rises through the shaft like a malevolent spirit, entering every apartment through every window, filling every room with a stench that is part rotting food, part stagnant water, part something indescribable that your nose refuses to categorize. You stuff rags around the window frame, you burn candles, you sprinkle baking soda on the floor. Nothing helps. The airshaft is what it is, and what it is in March is a chimney of stink. The reformers have been complaining about the airshafts for years. The old law tenements, built before the Tenement House Act of 1901, all have them. They were intended to provide light and ventilation to the interior rooms of the building, the rooms that had no windows facing the street or the backyard. The idea was sound. Cut a narrow channel between 2 adjacent buildings, and the rooms along that channel would have access to air and light. The reality was catastrophic. The shafts were too narrow, typically about 2.5 feet wide, to admit meaningful light, and the air that circulated through them was not fresh air but fetid air, contaminated by the garbage that accumulated at the bottom and the fumes that rose from the privies and cook stoves on every floor. The new law tenements, built after 1901, replaced the airshaft with a proper courtyard, wider and open to the sky, with room for garbage collection and actual airflow. But your building is old law, built in 1863, and it will have its airshaft until it is torn down, which will not happen for a long time because the landlord is making money from it, and has no incentive to demolish a building that generates rent. The Tenement House Act of 1901, the new law, was a landmark piece of legislation, the product of years of agitation by reformers, journalists and politicians. It mandated minimum standards for light, air, sanitation and fire safety in newly constructed tenement buildings, and it required that existing buildings be retrofitted to meet certain basic requirements: indoor toilets, fire escapes, a minimum number of windows. The act was the brainchild of Lawrence Vaillet, a housing reformer who had spent years documenting the conditions in the tenements and who argued, with statistics and photographs and sheer moral force, that the buildings were killing their residents. Vaillet's arguments were supported by data. The death rate in the tenement districts was significantly higher than in other parts of the city. Tuberculosis, the great killer of the poor, was concentrated almost entirely in the tenements. Infant mortality was staggering. In some blocks, 1 in 4 babies died before their first birthday. The causes were obvious: overcrowding, poor ventilation, contaminated water, inadequate sanitation. The solutions were equally obvious, at least in theory: more space, more air, more light, more toilets. The Tenement House Act attempted to mandate these solutions, and in many ways it succeeded. But the old buildings, The buildings built before 1901 remained, and their residents continued to live in conditions that the new law had deemed unacceptable. Your building is one of these. It has been retrofitted. The hallway toilets, the gas lighting, the steam heat, but its fundamental structure has not changed. The rooms are still small. The airshaft is still narrow. The staircase is still dark. The walls are still thin. The building is doing its best to comply with the law while changing as little as possible, which is, when you think about it, a very New York approach to regulation. March also brings changes to the garment shop. The busy season, winter clothing, is ending, and the spring season is beginning, which means a shift in production from heavy wool shirts to lighter cotton ones. The change does not affect you much. A shirt is a shirt, and the iron presses it regardless of the fabric, but it affects the seamstresses, who must adjust their machines and their techniques, and it affects the cutters, who must learn new patterns. There is a brief lull, a few days when the shop runs at half capacity, and during this lull, Kravitz does something unexpected. He sends half the workers home early. For you, this means an afternoon free, a Tuesday afternoon in March, when the sun is shining and the air is warm enough to walk without a coat. You leave the garment shop at 2 o'clock and step into the street and feel, for the first time since October, the sun on your face without the mediation of cold. The feeling is extraordinary. It is like being touched by something gentle and warm and alive, and you stand on the sidewalk for a full minute, face tilted up, eyes closed, simply feeling it. You walk. You walk without direction, following the streets wherever they lead, turning corners at random, exploring blocks you have never seen. You discover a park, Mulberry Bend Park, where old men sit on benches and children run on grass that is brown from the winter, but showing the first faint traces of green. This park replaced what was once the worst slum in the city, the Mulberry Bend, where bandits roost and ragpickers row once stood, where families lived in cellars and alleys in conditions that shocked even hardened New Yorkers. Jacob Riis, the journalist and photographer, spent years documenting the horrors of the Bend, and his work helped convince the city to tear the slum down and replace it with this park. You sit on a bench. The sun is warm, the children are laughing. A pigeon lands on the bench beside you and regards you with one orange eye, clearly hoping for bread. You have no bread, and you tell the pigeon so. It does not seem disappointed. Pigeons in New York are accustomed to rejection. Word count 1084, April. The transformation of the Lower East Side in spring is dramatic and rapid. The streets that were grey and frozen and hostile in January are now filled with colour and noise and the particular chaos that happens when an entire neighbourhood emerges from hibernation at once. The pushcart vendors are out in force. The children are in the streets from dawn to dusk. The fire escapes, which have been empty all winter, are now occupied. People sit on them in the evenings, reading newspapers, talking to their neighbours on the fire escapes above and below, watching the street life unfold beneath them like a theatre performance stage for their benefit. The clothes change. The heavy coats and scarves and hats of winter are replaced by lighter garments. Cotton shirts, linen dresses, straw hats that the men wear at a jaunty angle. The women hang their winter clothes in mothballs and bring out the summer clothes and hold them up to the light, inspecting for holes and stains and the damage of a winter spent folded in a trunk. The children, many of whom have been wearing the same clothes since October, suddenly appear in new outfits, or new to them outfits, acquired from the pushcart vendors who sell second-hand clothing by the pound. Your room, which was a refuge in winter, becomes a problem in spring. As the weather warms, the room grows hot, even without the steam heat which the landlord has turned off for the season. The room retains heat from the sun that beats down on the roof and from the bodies of the 100-plus residents who live in the building. The airshaft window, which you sealed against the cold with canvas and rags, must be opened, which means removing the canvas and rags and immediately being reminded of the smell that you managed to forget during the winter. The airshaft, with its accumulated winter deposits now thawing vigorously, is in its most pungent phase. You open the window, and the smell enters the room like an unwanted guest, settling into the corners and permeating the fabric of the curtain. You have acquired a curtain, a small piece of muslin that Rivka gave you, saying it was left over from a sewing project, and making you wonder, not for the first time, whether the airshaft is really providing more ventilation or merely more stink. April also brings a visitor, your cousin. His name is Stefan, and he arrived at Ellis Island last week with $20 in his pocket, which is $15 more than you had when you arrived. Stefan has been living with a family on Rivington Street, sleeping on their kitchen floor for 25 cents a night, and he has come to your room to ask your advice about finding work. He sits on the chair, the only chair, and looks around your room with an expression that you recognize because it is the same expression you wore when you first saw it, a mixture of disappointment and relief. Disappointed because the room is small and shabby and not what he imagined when he thought of America. Relieved because the room exists, because it is real, because it means that survival in this city is possible, even if it looks nothing like prosperity. You tell Stefan what you know. You tell him about the garment shops, the pressing irons, the $7 a week. You tell him about Kravitz and Moshe's philosophy and the weekly chess game with Avram. You tell him about the Mutual Aid Society, the cafe on Delancey Street, the Nickelodeon. You tell him about the radiator and the air shaft and the sound of the sewing machine through the floor. You tell him the truth, which is that life in New York is hard. Harder than he imagined, harder than the letter suggested, harder in ways that cannot be described but only experienced. And you tell him the other truth, which is that despite all of it, despite the noise and the smell and the work and the loneliness, you are glad you came. Because here, in this room, in this building, in this neighborhood, on this island, here there is a possibility. The possibility is small and distant and uncertain, but it exists. And in the old country, it did not. Stefan nods. He drinks the tea you have made him. You have acquired a teapot and 2 glasses, which feels like an extravagance. And he tells you about the journey, the steamship from Hamburg, the 2 weeks in steerage, packed into a compartment below the waterline with 400 other passengers, the air thick with the smell of vomit and unwashed bodies, the arrival at Ellis Island, the medical examination, the questions, name, age, occupation, how much money do you have? Do you have relatives in America? Have you ever been in prison? Are you an anarchist? The wait, the ferry to Manhattan. The first glimpse of the city from the water, the buildings, the bridges, the smoke, the noise. Stefan describes it with the wide eyes of someone who is still not entirely sure that what he saw was real. You let him talk. You remember your own arrival, and you know that the talking is necessary. It is a way of processing the enormity of what has happened, of converting an overwhelming experience into a story that can be held in the mind and examined from different angles. Everyone who comes through Ellis Island needs to tell the story. Everyone who hears it recognizes it as their own. Stefan leaves at 8 o'clock. You walk him to the staircase and tell him to come back on Sunday. He shakes your hand and smiles and disappears down the stairs, his footsteps receding into the general noise of the building. You go back to your room. The evening's mild enough that you leave the airshaft window open, despite the smell, because the air that comes through it. Tonight has a softness that is worth the price. The radiator is silent, a cold iron monument to the winter that has passed. The building is alive with the sounds of the evening, cooking, talking, the sewing machine, the accordion student on the 5th floor, who has, you notice with genuine pleasure, learned a 4th note. You lie on the bed. The straw mattress has moulded itself to your body over the months, creating a custom-shaped hollow that fits you exactly. The blanket is unnecessary tonight. The room is warm enough without it, and you lie on top of it, hands behind your head, looking up at the ceiling. Word count, 1063, May. The heat is coming. You can feel it building day by day as the sun climbs higher and the hours of daylight grow longer and the city begins. Its slow transformation from a place of cold discomfort to a place of hot discomfort. The tenements, designed in an era when the primary concern was keeping heat in, are catastrophically bad at keeping heat out. The dark brick absorbs sunlight all day and radiates it back all night. The rooms, with their low ceilings and small windows, trap air that grows hotter and staler as the hours pass. The air shaft, which was supposed to provide ventilation, acts instead as a chimney, drawing hot air up from the lower floors and concentrating it at the top of the building, which means that the residents of the upper floors, including you, live in the hottest part of the building, but that is still a few weeks away. Right now, in early May, the weather is that rare and perfect New York thing, warm without being hot, sunny without being glaring, breezy without being cold. This is the weather that makes people forgive the city for January. This is the weather that fills the parks and the stoops and the fire escapes with people who have forgotten what it feels like to be comfortable outdoors and are rediscovering it with the enthusiasm of children. On a Sunday in May, you do something you have never done before. You cross the Williamsburg Bridge. The bridge opened 2 years ago in 1903, and it connects the Lower East Side of Manhattan with the neighborhood of Williamsburg in Brooklyn. It is the longest suspension bridge in the world, longer even than the Brooklyn Bridge, and walking across it takes about 20 minutes, during which time you are suspended above the East River on a roadway that trembles slightly with the passage of trolley cars and horse-drawn wagons and the occasional automobile. The view from the bridge is extraordinary. To your left, south, you can see the Brooklyn Bridge, its Gothic towers rising above the river like the spires of a cathedral. To your right, north, you can see the smokestacks of the factories that line the waterfront, trailing plumes of grey and white smoke that dissolve into the sky. Below you, the East River moves slowly, its surface brown and opaque, carrying barges and tugboats and ferries and the occasional rowboat. And ahead of you, Brooklyn spreads out like a different country, lower, greener, more spacious than the Manhattan you have left behind. You walk across the bridge and into Williamsburg, which is in many ways a newer version of the Lower East Side. The same ethnic groups live here, Jews, Italians, Poles, Lithuanians, but the buildings are newer and the streets are wider, and the air is, if not exactly clean, at least slightly less thick with the smell of concentrated humanity. The rents are lower too. A 2-room apartment in Williamsburg costs about what a single room costs on the Lower East Side, and this is why families are beginning to move here, crossing the bridge every day to work in the garment shops and factories of Manhattan, and returning every evening to apartments where the children can play in the street without risk of being trampled. You walk through the streets of Williamsburg and think about whether you could live here. The commute would be longer, 20 minutes across the bridge plus the walk on either side, but the room would be bigger, and the air would be better, and the rent would be lower. You file this thought away, the way you filed away Avram's information about the shop on Rivington Street that pays $8 a week. You are collecting options. You are building a future out of small possibilities, the way a bird builds a nest out of small twigs, each one insignificant on its own, but collectively forming something that can hold the weight of a life. You walk back across the bridge as the sun begins to set. The sky turns orange and pink and purple, and the city on both sides of the river is silhouetted against the colours, and the bridge cables glow like harp strings in the fading light. Below you, the river catches the last of the sunlight, and throws it back as a shimmering gold that lasts for about 3 minutes and then fades to grey and then to black. The gas lamps on the bridge flicker to life. The city begins to twinkle. You return to the Lower East Side. The streets are in their Sunday evening mode, quieter than usual. The pushcart's gone, the factory's dark, the family's gathered inside for dinner. The smell of cooking drifts from every window. Chicken soup, fried fish, boiled potatoes, the universal aromatics of garlic and onion. You climb the stairs to your room and light the gas jet and sit at the table and think about the bridge, the view, the sunset and the future. Your savings have grown. You have, in the cloth bag inside the mattress, $23. This is more money than you have ever possessed. It is enough to buy a steamship ticket for your brother. It is enough to put a deposit on a 2-room apartment in Williamsburg. It is enough to buy a winter coat and a pair of proper shoes and still have money left over. It is not enough to do all of these things, which means you must choose, and choosing, deciding which of several small possibilities to pursue, is a luxury you have not had before. You choose the steamship ticket. You write to your brother that night, a long letter, the longest you have written since you arrived. You tell him to go to Hamburg. You tell him to buy a ticket, steerage, not cabin, because you are not made of money, and you tell him to come. You fold $20 into the letter and seal it and address it and walk it to the post office the next morning before work. The letter will take 3 weeks to arrive. The answer will take 3 weeks to come back. In between, you will press shirts and eat potatoes and listen to the radiator and play chess with Avram and attend the Mutual Aid Society meetings and ride the subway on Sundays and wait. Waiting is, perhaps, the primary occupation of the immigrant, waiting for letters, waiting for money, waiting for the future to arrive. Word count 132 June. The heat arrives in earnest, and with it the transformation of the tenement from a place of shelter to a place of endurance. The temperature in your room on a June afternoon, with the sun beating down on the roof and the air shaft acting as a chimney, can reach 95 degrees or higher. The air is so still and so humid that breathing feels like drinking warm water. The walls sweat. The ceiling drips. Your clothes are soaked within minutes of putting them on, and they stay soaked until you take them off. The nights are worse. At least during the day you're at the garment shop, which is also hot but which has the advantage of distraction. There is work to do, and doing it occupies your mind enough that you can almost ignore the heat. At night, there is nothing to do but lie on the bed and sweat and listen to the building sweat around you. The airshaft window is open as wide as it will go, but the air that comes through it is warm and smells of garbage and offers no relief. The fire escape beckons. This is how you discover the fire escape as a bedroom. One night in mid-June, when the temperature in your room has not dropped below 85 even at midnight, you drag your straw mattress through the window and onto the narrow iron platform of the fire escape. It barely fits. The mattress hangs over the edge on one side. But the air out here, 4 stories above the street, is noticeably cooler than the air inside. There is a breeze, faint and fitful but real, and it moves across your skin like a whisper. Above you, through the narrow rectangle of the airshaft, you can see a strip of sky, and in that strip, if the night is clear, you can see a few stars. Not many, because the city's gas lamps and electric arc lights wash out most of the sky, but enough to remind you that the sky exists. You're not alone on the fire escape. Half the building has had the same idea. Up and down the airshaft, on every floor, people are arranged on their fire escapes like passengers on the berths of a steamship. Above you, 2 floors up, a man is lying on his back smoking a cigarette, the red tip glowing and fading like a tiny signal light. Below you, a woman is sitting with her legs dangling over the edge, singing softly to herself. Across the airshaft, in the building next door, another row of fire escape sleepers is visible, their forms indistinct in the darkness. The children are on the roof. You can hear them, running, laughing, their voices drifting down through the shaft like birds. The rooftops of the tenements are, in summer, the playgrounds and bedrooms and social clubs of the neighbourhood. Families drag mattresses and blankets up the stairs and spread them out under the stars, and the children, freed from the confinement of the apartments, run wild across the connected rooftops, jumping the narrow gaps between buildings with a fearlessness that makes the adults sick with worry. Every summer, the newspapers report stories of people, usually children, sometimes adults who have fallen asleep too close to the edge, falling from the rooftops. The dangers are real, but the alternative, sleeping in a room where the temperature does not drop below 90, is worse. You lie on the fire escape and listen to the summer city. The sounds are different at night. The daytime roar of commerce and traffic has faded to a murmur, replaced by the softer sounds of the evening. Voices from open windows, laughter from the saloons, the distant clatter of a horse-drawn wagon on the cobblestones, the long, low whistle of a steamship in the harbour. The elevated train still runs, but less frequently, and each passage is an event, a roar that builds, peaks and fades, leaving behind a silence that feels deeper than it did before. Sometime after midnight, the neighbourhood settles into what passes for quiet. The last of the saloons closes its doors. The last of the pushcart vendors finishes cleaning his cart. The last of the children is called inside, or gives up and goes inside on their own, too tired to resist any longer. The street below is empty except for a cat that moves along the gutter with the silent purpose of a creature that owns the night. You close your eyes, the breeze touches your face, the iron grating of the fire escape presses into your back through the thin mattress, forming a pattern of lines that you will carry faintly on your skin until morning. The lullaby from the building next door, a different lullaby tonight, in a language you think might be Greek, drifts across the airshaft and reaches you as a thread of melody barely audible, just enough to fill the silence without breaking it. You sleep, and in your sleep, you dream of the old country. Not the poverty and the fear and the reasons you left, but the other parts, the parts you miss. The sound of rain on a thatched roof, the smell of bread baking in a clay oven, the feel of grass under your bare feet, the voice of your mother calling you in for supper. These things are still inside you, folded into the spaces between your ribs, carried across the ocean in the same bag that carried your clothes and your hopes and your $20. But when you wake, and you will wake because the sun rises early in June and strikes the airshaft with a light that is pale and golden and impossible to ignore, you will be here in New York on a fire escape in the year 1905, and you will climb back through the window and drag the mattress inside and wash your face with water from the bucket and put on your hat and walk to work. Because the shirts will not press themselves and the rent will not pay itself, and the future, whatever it holds, will not arrive without you. Word count 14, July. The heat reaches its peak. The city becomes a furnace, and the tenements are its fuel. The newspapers report the temperature every day, 92, 95, 98, and they report the deaths too. People die of heat in New York in the summer of 1905. Not many, not compared to the great heat waves of later decades, but enough. The old and the very young are the most vulnerable. Babies in airless tenement rooms, their bodies unable to regulate temperature, develop fevers and diarrhea and die within days. Old people, already weakened by years of hard labor and poor nutrition, simply stop breathing in their sleep, overcome by the heat that the walls have absorbed during the day and are now releasing slowly and inexorably throughout the night. The smell of the city in July is a thing of legend. The combination of heat, horse manure, garbage, sewage, and the sweat of 3.5 million people creates an olfactory experience that visitors from the countryside find physically overwhelming. The air shafts are at their worst. The gutters run with a brown liquid that is best not examined too closely. The East River, which receives the output of the city's sewers, has a smell that can be detected from blocks away, depending on the direction of the wind. But the city adapts. It always adapts. The pushcart vendors sell ice, blocks of it, cut from frozen lakes upstate during the winter and stored in insulated warehouses and delivered to the city by wagon throughout the summer. You can buy a small piece for a penny, and you hold it in your hands and press it to your forehead and feel the cold run down your arms like a benediction. Children follow the ice wagon through the streets, begging for chips and slivers, and the iceman, who is usually a large, good-natured man with arms like tree trunks, obliges them, flicking small pieces from the block with his pick. The fire hydrants become the neighborhood swimming pools. On the hottest days, someone, usually a teenager with a wrench, opens a hydrant, and the water erupts onto the street in a geyser that the children run through, screaming with joy. The adults tolerate this, even though it reduces the water pressure in the entire block and sometimes makes the hallway taps run dry, because the sight of children playing in water on a sweltering afternoon is one of the few genuinely happy things that happen on these streets. You have settled into a summer routine that is different from your winter routine in one critical respect. You sleep outside. Every night you drag your mattress onto the fire escape and sleep in the open air, returning to your room only when rain threatens. This is not comfortable. The fire escape is narrow and hard, and the noise from the street and the rooftops makes sleep fitful at best. But it is survivable, which the inside of your room at 95 degrees is barely. The garment shop is hellish in July. The combination of 32 bodies, pressing irons, gas jets, and a closed window policy makes the temperature inside the shop well over 100 degrees. Workers faint. They are revived with water and told to continue. Some of them protest. Some of them leave. They are replaced by the next day. There is always someone willing to work, because there is always someone who needs $7 a week more than they need comfort. Moshe, your philosophical companion at the pressing board, has developed a theory about heat. Heat, he says, is God's way of reminding the rich that they are not gods, because heat does not care how much money you have. Heat enters the mansion the same way it enters the tenement. This is not, strictly speaking, true. The mansions on Fifth Avenue have ice deliveries and shaded, gardens and rooms with high ceilings and cross-ventilation, but it is philosophically satisfying, and in July, philosophical satisfaction is about all you can afford. One evening in late July after work, you do something impulsive. Instead of going home, you walk to the East River. It takes about 20 minutes, and by the time you reach the waterfront, the sun is low and the water is catching the light in long, golden streaks that make it look almost beautiful, despite the smell. You stand on the pier and look out across the river at Brooklyn, at the factories and warehouses that line the shore, at the barges moving slowly with the current, and you feel the breeze that comes off the water, cool and salty and real. There are other people on the pier, men from the neighborhood mostly, who have come for the same reason you have. The breeze. They stand in small groups, smoking, talking quietly, looking out at the water with the universal expression of people who are thinking about something they cannot say. The pier is not a park. It is a working waterfront lined with warehouses and loading docks, and the air smells of fish and tar and rope. But the breeze is real, and on a July evening in the Lower East Side, a real breeze is worth any amount of fish smell. You stand on the pier until the sun goes down and the sky turns from gold to pink to purple to deep blue. The lights of Brooklyn begin to appear, gas lamps and electric lights and the glow of windows, and their reflections shiver on the surface of the water like fallen stars. A ferry crosses the river, its lights moving slowly from one shore to the other, trailing a wake that catches the reflections and scatters them. A steamship horn sounds in the harbour, long and low, the same sound you heard on your first night in the building, the sound of arrivals and departures, the sound of a city that is always in motion. You walk home. The streets are hot and crowded and alive. The fire escapes are occupied. The rooftops are occupied. The stoops are occupied. The entire neighbourhood is outside, driven from their rooms by the heat, occupying every available surface like water filling a container. This is the Lower East Side in summer, a place where the boundary between inside and outside dissolves, where the street becomes an extension of the apartment and the apartment becomes merely a place to store your things. Word count 144, August. The heat continues, but you have learned to live with it the way you have learned to live with everything else. The noise, the smell, the work, the loneliness. You have learned that the body can adapt to almost anything if given enough time. And you have been given enough time. 6 months in the tenement have taught you things that no book or letter or piece of advice could have conveyed. They have taught you the geography of discomfort. Which corner of the room is coolest in summer? Which spot on the fire escape catches the most breeze? Which stairwell is least crowded at which hour? They have taught you the economics of poverty. Exactly how many potatoes you can buy for 5 cents. Exactly how long a bar of soap will last if you use it sparingly. Exactly how much you can save if you eat bread and herring for dinner instead of bread and cheese. And they have taught you something else, something harder to articulate. They have taught you that a life can be small and still be a life. That a room can be 120 square feet and still contain everything that matters. Warmth, shelter, a door that locks, a window that opens. That happiness is not a function of space, but of what you do with the space you have. You have seen this in the building, in Avram's apartment, where a family of 6 lives in 2 rooms and fills those rooms with chess and tea, and conversation, and the particular warmth that comes from people who love each other in close quarters. In Rivka's sewing, which turns scraps of fabric into garments that her children wear with pride. In the woman on the 3rd floor whose suitor brings flowers every Sunday and whose jar of flowers on the windowsill is the only beautiful thing in her room, and who treats it with the reverence of a museum curator. This is not a lesson you expected to learn. You came to America expecting to learn how to be rich. Instead, you are learning how to be poor, which is a different skill entirely and one that, paradoxically, may serve you better in the long run. In mid-August, a letter arrives from your brother. It has been folded and refolded so many times that the creases are beginning to tear. He has received the money. He has bought the ticket. He is leaving next month on a ship from Hamburg, and he will arrive in New York in October. He says he is excited. He says he is scared. He says he hopes the room you described in your letters is not as small as it sounds. You read the letter twice, and then you read it again. And then you fold it carefully and put it in the cloth bag with your remaining savings, and sit on the bed and think about what you need to do. You need a bigger room. 1 room is barely enough for 1 person. For 2, it will be impossible. You need 2 rooms, a proper apartment with a kitchen and a sleeping room, with a window that faces the street, and a door that locks and enough space for 2 beds and a table, and the beginning of something that resembles a home. You begin to look. You ask around the building, the garment shop, the mutual aid society. You check the listings posted on the walls of the saloons and the notices pinned to the bulletin board at the cafe on Delancey Street. A 2-room apartment on the Lower East Side in 1905 cost between $10 and $15 a month, depending on the floor, the condition, and the location. This is more than 3 times what you are currently paying for your single room. It will consume nearly half of your weekly wage, which means that you and your brother, between you, will need to earn at least $15 a week to cover the rent and still have enough left for food and the other costs of living. If your brother can find a job at the garment shop, and there are always jobs at the garment shop because people are always leaving, either to better shops or to worse ones or to the hospital or back to the old country, then together you will earn $14 a week, which is close enough to $15 that you can make it work if you're careful. You find a place. It is on the 3rd floor of a building on Rivington Street, 2 blocks from the garment shop where Avram's brother-in-law works. 2 rooms, a kitchen and a bedroom, with a window facing the street and another facing the air shaft. The kitchen has a sink with running water, a coal stove, and enough space for a table and 2 chairs. The bedroom has room for 2 narrow beds side by side, with about 18 inches between them. The rent is $12 a month. You tell the landlord you will take it starting October 1st. You pay the first month's rent and a deposit of $2. Your savings, which had grown to $23 before you sent the steamship money, are now down to $4. You're almost as poor as the day you arrived. But you have a room, 2 rooms, and your brother is coming, and October is not so far away. You spend the remaining weeks of August in your old room, the 120-square-foot room on the 4th floor with the airshaft window and the straw mattress, and the radiator that will, in a few weeks, begin its nightly symphony again. You have lived here for 10 months. It is the longest you have lived anywhere since you left the old country. The water stains on the ceiling, which you once thought looked like maps of countries that do not exist, now look like old friends, familiar, comforting, known. The sounds of the building, the sewing machine, the accordion, Petrus from Lithuania talking in his sleep in a language you do not understand, are the sounds of your life, and you will miss them, or at least you will miss the particular configuration of them that you have grown accustomed to. But you are ready to go. You are ready for the next room, the next building, the next chapter. Your brother is coming. The shirts need to be pressed. The rent needs to be paid. The future is arriving slowly on a steamship from Hamburg, and you need to be ready for it. Word count 1035. September. The heat breaks, finally and definitively, in the first week of the month. A cold front moves in from the northwest, dropping the temperature 20 degrees overnight, and the city exhales. The fire escape's empty. The mattresses are dragged back inside. The rooftops are abandoned to the pigeons and the laundry. The windows close one by one, and the building seals itself against the autumn, and the radiators, dormant since April, begin to whisper of their return. You are in transition. The new apartment on Rivington Street is waiting, but the lease does not start until October 1st, and so you spend September in the old room, packing. Though packing is perhaps too grand a word for assembling a canvas bag, a water bucket, a basin, a teapot, 2 glasses, a pot, a fork, a bar of soap, and a curtain. These are your possessions. 10 months in New York, and this is what you have accumulated. It fits in 1 bag. It weighs less than 30 pounds. It is, you reflect, either a testament to the simplicity of your life or an indictment of the economy that supports it. Probably both. The garment shop is in its full rush. Winter clothing again, wool and heavy cotton, this cycle repeating. And the hours are long. 12-hour days, 6 days a week, and Kravitz is driving the workers harder than ever, because the orders are piling up and the deadline is approaching, and the factory owners do not care about the reasons why a shirt is late. They only care that it is late. You press and press and press. The iron rising and falling like a slow heartbeat, and your arms ache and your back aches and the sweat runs down your face and soaks the collar of your shirt. And you think about October, and the new room and your brother and the future, and the thinking makes the work bearable, or at least less unbearable. At the Mutual Aid Society meeting you announce that you are moving. Dmitri, the president, congratulates you, and says that a 2-room apartment is a big step. A step toward respectability. A step toward becoming a real American. You're not sure what he means by a real American. You're fairly certain that Dmitri himself, who has been in the country for 12 years and still speaks English with an accent that could stop traffic, is not a real American by any standard, that the native-born would recognize. But you accept the compliment in the spirit in which it is intended. The chess games with Avram take on a valedictory quality. You will still see him. Rivington Street is only 2 blocks from Hester, but it will not be the same as living in the same building, being able to knock on his door on a Saturday evening without planning or invitation. Avram gives you a gift on your last Saturday, a proper chess set, wooden pieces in a wooden box, second-hand but complete. He tells you that he found it at the pushcart market and that it cost 15 cents, which you know is a lie, because a complete chess set, even second-hand, costs at least 50 and 50 cents. Is a significant sum for a man who supports a wife and 4 children on $8 a week. You do not argue. You accept the gift and thank him and promise to play him every Saturday, and you both know that you will for a while and then you will not, because that is how things work. Proximity creates friendship and distance. Even the distance of 2 blocks erodes it. On the last day of September, you carry your bag down the stairs and out the front door and stand on the sidewalk and look up at the building. It is the same building it was 10 months ago, 6 stories of soot-stained brick, fire escapes draped with laundry, windows dark or glowing depending on the Time of day and the habits of the occupants, it has not changed. But you have. You are not the same person who walked in through that door. On an October evening with $4.30 in his pocket, and no idea what the sound of a steam radiator would do to his sleep. You are, in some small but measurable way, a New Yorker now. You know the sounds, you know the smells, you know the rhythms. You know the price of potatoes and the schedule of the elevated train, and the name of the pickle vendor on Hester Street, and the location of every working fire hydrant within 3 blocks. You walk to Rivington Street. The new building is similar to the old one. Of course it is. All tenement buildings are similar, variations on the same grim theme. But it is newer, built after the Tenement House Act, and the differences are noticeable. The hallways are wider, the staircase is lighter, with a window on every landing. The air shaft has been replaced by a proper courtyard, open to the sky, where garbage is collected rather than allowed to rot. The toilets are inside the apartments, not in the hallway. There is a sink in the kitchen with running water, both hot and cold, which feels, after 10 months of carrying buckets, like the pinnacle of luxury. You set your bag on the floor of the bedroom. You look around. 2 rooms, a window facing the street, a sink with running water, a toilet behind a door that locks. This is, by the standards of the Lower East Side in 1905, a good apartment. This is the kind of apartment that working families aspire to, the kind that represents the difference between barely surviving and actually living. It is still small. It is still in a tenement building on the Lower East Side. It is still a place where the walls are thin and the neighbours are close, and the sounds of other people's lives are as present as your own. But it is yours, and it is waiting for your brother. And it is, in its humble way, a beginning. Word count verse 9, October. 1 year since you arrived on the Lower East Side. 1 year since you walked down the Bowery. With a canvas bag over your shoulder and $4.30 in your pocket and no idea what lay ahead. In that year, you have pressed approximately 75,000 shirts. You have eaten approximately 360 pounds of potatoes. You have carried approximately 2,000 buckets of water. You have listened to approximately 3,000 hours of radiator noise. You have walked approximately 1,200 miles back and forth between your room and the garment shop, and the pushcart market and Feldman's Cafe and the Mutual Aid Society and the Nickelodeon and the subway and the pier on the East River. These numbers mean nothing, and they mean everything. They are the arithmetic of an immigrant's first year, the quantification of a life that is made up of small, repetitive acts performed millions of times. Each act, lifting the iron, climbing the stairs, carrying the bucket, is insignificant in itself. Together, they are a year. Your brother arrives on a Tuesday in the middle of October. You meet him at Ellis Island, or rather you meet him at the Battery, at the southern tip of Manhattan, where the ferries from Ellis Island discharge their passengers into the city. You have not seen him in a year and a half, and the sight of him, thinner than you remember, paler, wearing a coat that is too large and a hat that is too small, produces in you a feeling that you do not have a word for. It is not happiness exactly, though it includes happiness. It is not relief, though it includes relief. It is something closer to recognition. The recognition that a part of your life that has been missing has been restored, that the distance you've been carrying has been reduced, that you are, for the first time since you left the old country, not alone. He looks at you the way Stefan looked at you, taking in the changes that a year in New York has produced. You are thinner too, though harder. Your hands are calloused from the pressing iron. Your posture has acquired a slight forward lean, the presser's stoop caused by 10 months of bending over an ironing board. Your English is better, not good but functional, enough to buy bread and negotiate with landlords and tell Kravitz that the iron needs replacing. You are, in the eyes of someone who has just arrived from the old country, impossibly worldly. You take him to Rivington Street. You show him the apartment. He stands in the doorway and looks at the 2 rooms, the kitchen with its sink and stove, the bedroom with its 2 beds. And he says nothing for a long time. Then he says, "It is small." You say, "Yes." He says, "But it is ours." You say, "Yes." That night you lie in your beds, side by side, separated by 18 inches of floor, and talk. You talk about the old country, about the family, about the journey. He tells you about the steamship, the same story Stefan told, because all steamship stories are the same story. The crowding, the seasickness, the terrible food, the fear, the hope, the first sight of the Statue of Liberty standing in the harbour like a promise that may or may not be kept. You tell him about New York, the garment shop, the pushcarts, the subway, the Nickelodeon, the radiator. You tell him about Moshe's philosophy and Avram's chess and Kravitz's bell. You tell him about the airshaft and the fire escape and the sewing machine that thumps through the floor at midnight. He listens, he asks questions. He falls asleep mid-sentence the way travellers do, the way you did on your first night, overcome not by fatigue alone, but by the sheer weight of newness. The exhaustion of being in a place where everything, the sounds, the smells, the language, the light, is unfamiliar. You lie awake a little longer. The radiator in the new apartment is newer than the one in your old room. It was installed when the building was built, not retrofitted, and its sounds are different. It does not bang as loudly. It does not hiss as violently. It ticks and sighs and breathes, a gentler version of the same old song. And the heat it produces is more even, more reliable, thanks to the newer pipes and the shorter distance from the boiler. Through the window, the street-facing window, a luxury you still cannot quite believe, you can hear the sounds of the neighbourhood settling in for the night. A horse clopping down the street, a woman singing, a dog barking once, twice, and then falling silent. The distant rumble of the elevated train, which is farther from Rivington Street than it was from your old building, which means the sound is softer, more of a hum than a roar. Your brother breathes beside you, a slow, deep rhythm that is the rhythm of sleep, the rhythm of someone who has crossed an ocean and arrived and found a bed and surrendered to it. You match your breathing to his, an old habit from the old country, from the time when you shared a bed, and breathing in sync was the closest thing to a lullaby that your family could afford. The room is warm, the radiator ticks, your brother breathes, and you, for the first time in a year, do not feel alone in the dark. The weeks that follow your brother's arrival are a period of adjustment, not just for him, but for you. You have grown accustomed to solitude, to having the room to yourself, to eating alone, to sleeping alone, to the particular quiet that comes from being the only person in a space. Now there are two of you, and the apartment, which seemed spacious when you moved in, suddenly feels smaller. 2 beds, 2 coats on the hooks, 2 pairs of shoes by the door, 2 water glasses on the shelf. The mathematics of shared space are different from the mathematics of solitary space, and it takes time to learn them. Your brother finds work at the garment shop on Rivington Street, the one Avram told you about, the one that pays $8 a week. He's assigned to the cutting table, which requires a steady hand and a good eye, both of which he has. The work is hard. All work in the garment industry is hard. But he is young and strong and eager to prove himself. And within a week, the foreman has stopped checking his work because it does not need checking. Together, you earn $15 a week. Out of this, $12 goes to rent, food, and the basic costs of living, leaving $3 for savings and incidentals. This is more than you have ever saved before. The cloth bag in the mattress, your mattress, since you still distrust banks, begins to grow again, slowly but steadily. And you begin to think about things you have never thought about before. A phonograph, a winter coat that fits properly, a ticket for your mother. The apartment on Rivington Street is different from your old room in ways that go beyond size and plumbing. It is, in a small but meaningful way, a home. You and your brother eat meals together, sitting at the kitchen table, which now has 2 chairs. You cook together, or rather, you cook and he watches, because his culinary skills are limited to boiling water, and even that he manages with an air of uncertainty that suggests he's not entirely sure what boiling water is for. You teach him the things you've learned, where to buy the cheapest potatoes, which bakery has the best rolls, how to negotiate with the pickle vendor. He absorbs it all with the intensity of someone who understands that knowledge, in this city, is survival. On Sunday mornings, you take him to the subway. His reaction is the same as yours was: wonder, disbelief, a childlike pleasure in the speed and the lights and the stations flashing past. You ride from one end to the other, and he presses his face to the window and watches the tunnel walls and asks questions that you cannot always answer. How fast are we going? How deep are we? What holds the ceiling up? You make up answers when you do not know the real ones, which is what older brothers have been doing since the invention of questions. On Wednesday evenings, you take him to the Mutual Aid Society meeting. Dimitri introduces him as your brother, and the members welcome him with handshakes and backslaps and glasses of beer, and he is enrolled as a member on the spot. His monthly dues of 25 cents added to the ledger alongside yours. He does not understand everything that is said. The meetings are conducted in a mixture of languages that is challenging even for those who have been here for years. But he understands the purpose. which is that these men have each other's backs, and now they have his. November arrives, and with it the familiar rhythms of winter, the cold, the steam heat, the radiator. Your brother, hearing the radiator for the first time, reacts the way you reacted, with alarm, confusion, and the certainty that the building is collapsing. You explain the system to him, the boiler, the pipes, the water hammer, and he nods and looks unconvinced and spends the first few nights with a pillow over his head. Within a week he has stopped hearing it. Within a month he will not be able to sleep without it. The building is fuller now. The apartment next door, which was empty when you moved in, has been rented by a family from Naples, a father, a mother, and 3 children under the age of 7. The children are loud and cheerful and perpetually in motion, and their mother cooks with the generosity of garlic that can be detected from 2 floors away. The father works at a construction site and comes home every evening covered in plaster dust, which he tracks through the hallway and up the stairs, leaving a white trail that the other residents follow like breadcrumbs. You and your brother fall into a rhythm. Work, eat, sleep. Work, eat, sleep. The simplicity of it is both its burden and its grace. There is no variety, no surprise, no deviation from the pattern. But there is also no crisis, no emergency, no moment of panic when you wonder whether you will survive. You are surviving. You are, by the standards of the Lower East Side, doing well. You have a 2-room apartment, you have 2 incomes, you have a mutual aid society and a chess set and a spot at Feldman's Cafe. You have, in other words, the beginnings of a life. December again. A year has passed since your first December in the tenements, and the cold feels different this time. Not less cold, but less frightening. You know what to expect. You know how to manage the coal stove, how to insulate the windows, how to dress in layers, how to time the radiator's moods. You know the winter the way a sailor knows the sea, not mastered but understood. The building on Rivington Street celebrates the holidays in its own way. The Jewish families light menorahs in their windows, 8 nights of candles that glow in the darkness and reflect off the glass and create from the street a constellation of small warm lights that transforms the building's facade from something grim into something almost beautiful. The Italian family next door hangs a wreath on their door, made of pine branches and tied with a red ribbon that their oldest daughter cut from a scrap of fabric at the garment shop. The smell of pine mixes with the smell of garlic and the smell of candle wax and the smell of the building itself, and the result is a fragrance that is, in its own complicated way, festive. Your brother has settled in. He no longer looks at the room with disappointment. He has stopped comparing it to the old country, stopped measuring it against the fantasies he carried across the ocean. He has discovered the Nickelodeon and the pushcart market and the cafe on Delancey Street. He has discovered the subway and the bridge and the view from the pier on the East River. He has discovered, in short, the small pleasures that make the large deprivations bearable. He has also discovered the accordion student on the 5th floor of your old building, or rather, a different accordion student on a different floor of a different building, because every tenement in the Lower East Side seems to contain at least one person who is learning to play an instrument badly. This one is learning the mandolin, and the sound of his practice sessions, a tinkling, plinking sound that is half music and half injury, drifts down through the ceiling every evening between 7 and 8. Your brother finds this funny. You find it less funny than he does, but you do not complain, because complaining about noise in a tenement is like complaining about water in the ocean, technically valid but practically pointless. On a night in late December, you and your brother sit at the kitchen table and drink tea and talk about the future. The future is a word that has meant different things at different times in your life. In the old country, the future meant more of the same. More poverty, more work, more of the particular kind of hopelessness that comes from knowing that nothing will change. On the steamship, the future meant America, a word so large and so vague that it could contain anything, every dream and every fear simultaneously. In the lodging house, the future meant a room. In the room, the future meant a better room. In the better room, the future means what? Your brother says, a shop. He wants to open a shop. Not a pushcart, not a garment workshop, but a real shop. A store. With walls and a roof and a door and a sign with his name on it. He wants to sell shoes. He has always liked shoes. In the old country he apprenticed with a cobbler for 2 years, and he can make a pair of shoes from raw leather, and he believes, with the unshakable optimism of someone who has been in America for less than 3 months, that this is a skill that America will reward. You listen. You do not tell him that the dream of a shop is, for most immigrants, exactly that, a dream. You do not tell him that the arithmetic of saving enough money to rent a storefront and buy inventory and furnish a workshop is daunting, that it would take years of saving at the current rate, that the risks are enormous and the failure rate is high. You do not tell him these things because you do not know them for certain, and because the dream is doing something useful. It is keeping him going, giving him a reason to press shirts or cut fabric or carry buckets, and a reason, in the tenements, is not something you discard lightly. Instead you say, yes, a shop. Let us save for a shop. And the future, which has been contracting and expanding like an accordion, a badly played accordion perhaps, but an accordion nonetheless, opens a little wider. The night deepens, the radiator ticks, the mandolin student upstairs has stopped playing. The Italian children next door have been put to bed, and the building is settling into the relative quiet of late evening. Your brother yawns and stretches and says good night and goes to bed. You hear him arrange himself on the mattress, hear the straw crinkle, hear his breathing slow and deepen as sleep takes him. You sit at the table a little longer. The tea is cold. The gas jet flickers. Through the window, the street-facing window, you can see the night sky, or the narrow strip of it that is visible between the buildings. There are no stars tonight. The clouds are low and thick, and the glow of the city's lights reflects off them, creating an orange-grey ceiling over the rooftops. But somewhere above the clouds the stars are there. The same stars that shine over the old country, the same stars that shone over the ocean, the same stars that will shine over this city long after. You and your brother and everyone you know have gone. You stand up from the table. You turn down the gas jet until the flame is barely visible. A tiny blue point of light that flickers in the draught from the window. The room dims. The shadows gather in the corners soft and deep. And the only light is the faint glow from the gas jet and the fainter glow from the street lamp outside, filtering through the curtain and painting a pale rectangle on the opposite wall. You walk to the bedroom. Your brother is asleep, his face turned to the wall, one hand curled under his pillow. The room is warm. The radiator has been running steadily all evening, and the temperature is comfortable. Not too hot, not too cold, just warm enough to sleep under a single blanket with the window cracked open an inch. The air that comes through the crack is cold and clean. Winter air sharp with frost, carrying the faint smell of snow that has not yet fallen but is gathering somewhere above the city, waiting. You take off your shoes and set them beside the bed. You loosen your collar. You lie down on the mattress, which has been in this apartment for 2 months and has already begun to take on the shape of your body, the familiar hollows and ridges that make it yours. You pull the blanket up to your chest and settle into the position that your body has decided over the course of a year is the one most conducive to sleep. On your right side, knees slightly bent, one hand under the pillow, the other resting on the blanket. The sounds of the building come to you now, one by one, like instruments in an orchestra tuning up before a performance. The radiator with its soft ticking, the water in the pipes with its distant gurgle. A door closing somewhere below, gently, carefully. The door of someone who knows that the building is sleeping and does not want to wake it. Footsteps in the hallway. Soft ones, the footsteps of someone in slippers or stockings, padding to the toilet and back. The creak of a floorboard in the apartment above, the particular creak that means someone has rolled over in bed. From outside the sounds are softer still. The horse on the street, its hooves muffled by the cold, a slow clop-clop that fades south and disappears. The wind, which has picked up since you came inside, pressing against the window with a low hum. The elevated train, far enough away that its passing is not a roar but a rumble, a vibration that you feel in your chest more than you hear with your ears. You think about the year. You think about the room, the first room, the one on the 4th floor with the airshaft window and the straw mattress and the water stains on the ceiling. You think about the walk down the Bowery on that first night, the gas lamps and the arc lights and the elevated train shaking loose its rain of soot. You think about the landlord's agent who did not ask your name. You think about the radiator banging in the dark and how you flinched so hard you nearly fell off the bed. You think about Iancu coughing through the wall, and you wonder where he is now and whether he is warm. You think about Moshe standing at the pressing board, lifting the iron and setting it down, lifting and setting and saying that the iron is like life. Heavy, hot, and if you hold it still too long, it burns. You think about Avram sitting across the chessboard, his reading glasses on his forehead, his children building towers on the floor. You think about the pickle vendor on Hester Street, reaching into his barrel of brine. You think about the snow falling past the airshaft window, white and soft and brief. You think about the subway rushing through the earth at 40 miles an hour. You think about the bridge stretched across the river, its cables glowing in the sunset. You think about the pier and the breeze off the water, and the ferry crossing in the dark with its lights reflected on the surface. You think about the letter folded in the cloth bag with the $20 inside. You think about your brother lying beside you, breathing in his sleep, dreaming of a shop, and you think about the morning, which will come as it always does, with the sound of the building waking, the doors, the footsteps, the clatter of the pot on the stove, the child's voice demanding something in a language that is becoming, by slow degrees, your own. You will get up, you will wash your face, you will buy a roll, you will walk to work, you will lift the iron and set it down and lift it again. And the day will pass and you will come home and you will cook potatoes and you will sit at the table and drink tea and you will listen to the radiator tick. And you will be alive. But that is the morning. That is later. That is tomorrow. Right now there is only this. The blanket, the pillow, the warm room, the ticking radiator, the breathing of your brother beside you, and the great city outside the window humming and murmuring and settling into its version of sleep, which is never quite silence, but is, at this hour, close enough. Your eyes close, the gas jet flickers and dies. The room is dark, the radiator ticks one last time and then goes quiet or seems to. It is still ticking. But you have stopped hearing it, the way you have stopped hearing the wind and the traffic and the footsteps, because you are drifting now. Drifting down into the warm dark space between waking and sleeping, where the sounds become soft and the walls dissolve, and the room expands until it is as large as the world. Sleep now. Let the city hold you. Let the building breathe around you. Let the night carry you forward, gently, into whatever comes next. The rent is paid, the door is locked, the radiator is warm, and you are here, in your room, in your building, in your city, in your life. End of script. Sweet dreams. Word count 1051. End of script. Sweet dreams. Sleep now and let the city hold you gently through the night.